I'm Archana Soreng from India. I belong to Khariya tribe. My grandfather was a pioneer of community led forest protection practices. He was of the firm believer that we should have a sustainable relationship with nature. We cannot achieve our climate and developmental agenda and goals without a healthy planet.
We've known for years that technology can play an important role in addressing climate change. Solar panels, electric cars, and windmills reduce our dependence on fossil fuels for energy and limit the release of the greenhouse gases that are warming our planet. But the truth is, another essential tool has been with us all along. For millions of years, forests, plants, and soils have been keeping our planet alive.
In the past, we understand that we've been damaging our environment. We understand that through conservation, we can change a lot of things, the livelihood in the community. We can tackle a lot of climate effect on our community.
The protection of mangroves means the protection from storm surges and protection of our food source.
If we succeed all the projects that we've been working for, when we come here, we have enough to consume. We maintain our own resources and teach it to our children, and then live in a better environment, clean environment.
Aweri anabai wa muni bai pembete ke nanipa. Monito konve ate imunipa. Monito yekene arubai pentono omed ne amuni monipa.
Healthy ecosystems regulates our drinking water, the source of all life on earth.
En los años 2010 se vio reflejado de que ya no había que vender. Habíamos talado muchos árboles. Cuando nos damos cuenta ya no había nada atrás, no había bosque, ¿no? Pero ¿cómo paramos? ¿Cuál es la alternativa para poder generar ingresos económicos para la comunidad o para las familias? Cultivar el cacao y el café y así generar ingresos y a no talar más bosques.
50% of humanity depends on healthy ecosystems for the livelihood of farming, fishing, and forestry. But the way we manage land today in conventional agriculture and forestry creates a quarter of human-caused greenhouse gases.
Every year, though, we burn and deforest millions of acres of land. When we do that, an incredible amount of carbon is released into the atmosphere, contributing to the warming of our planet. Not only is that stored carbon released as carbon emissions, but we are destroying our most effective technology for removing carbon from the air, growing trees.
Nature is essential for capturing carbon from the atmosphere. But because of human impacts, many areas of forests that were once carbon sinks are now becoming carbon sources. Intact nature is our ally. It keeps our climate stable and keeps us safe.
คือเราเกิดมาก็เจอแล้วไงเจอคือณทุกวันนี้เราก็ยังหากินอยู่จากตรงป่านี้ค่ะหน่อไม้เห็ดบ้างหาปูหาปลาผักทุกชนิดไม่ว่าหน้าไหนเราจะรู้หน้านี้เราควรผักอะไรบ้างอย่างนี้ค่ะมันเหมือนอยากกินเราเข้ามาเราก็ได้เลยอ่ะ
Esta es una crema anti-envejecimiento que nos ayuda a prevenir las líneas de expresión. Para nosotros ha sido básico tener en cuenta pues los recursos genéticos en cuanto a la riqueza que nos ofrece cada una de las plantas.
We study this ancient freshwater swamps as reference ecosystems, preserved in pristine condition through the centuries by generations, sacred in their belief and wisdom.
Intact nature is the planetary safety net. This does not have to be the end of our story.
Welcome back to the Nature for Life Hub. I'm Jameson Irvin, the host of today's Nature for Life Hub. We know that nature underpins sustainable development. In fact, at least half of all of the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals depend partially or wholly on a healthy environment. In this next session, we'll take a look at the different ways nature-based solutions provide for food and water security, for safety and disaster risk reduction, for health and nutrition, and so much more. We'll even look at how nature can fuel our imagination to solve engineering challenges. Let's get started.
Rampant wildfires, mass flooding, extreme temperatures. We are witnessing a planetary crisis unfold in real time, and every passing moment reveals a more pressing need for change. But where there is a problem, there is a solution. And when it comes to tackling the climate crisis, nature is our greatest ally. It's time we recognize its value. This is where nature-based solutions come into play. But what exactly do those look like? Nature-based solutions are all about working with nature instead of against nature. When we champion nature-based solutions, we all benefit from the results they provide for the issues facing our planet. Take mangroves, for example. If all mangroves were lost or destroyed, 15 million more people would be affected by floods across the world each year. This means mangrove forests not only provide habitats for fish, they also provide protective natural barriers and solutions against strong storms, floods, and erosion. They filter water, provide food and timber resources to coastal communities, and can store huge amounts of carbon. Conserving and restoring these ecosystems allows people and nature to thrive, all the while reducing risks posed by the climate crisis. By working with nature like this and changing how we use land, researchers estimate we can reduce emissions by up to 1/3 of what's needed to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And mangroves aren't alone in their value. Other ecosystems also offer incredible solutions to issues we may not even think about, such as coral reefs, whose ability to reduce the intensity of waves is crucial to shielding tens of millions of people from floods. Some studies actually suggest they can be even more effective than human-built breakwaters at this task. Or grasslands and savannas, which provide homes for wildlife and help capture and store carbon. The natural world does so much to sustain and protect us and all those we share this planet with. We must do the same in return, and we must do it now. Nature-based solutions are a win-win for each and every one of us, and it's time we pay attention to them.
Nature-based solutions can help fight climate change, biodiversity loss, and poverty. We live in a world where landscapes are dominated by farming and infrastructure, with very little space left for nature. Yet nature is our life support system, and with 1 million species at risk of extinction and extreme events increasing as the planet warms, people are suffering. But we can, and we must choose a different future. Nature-based solutions involve protecting our natural ecosystems, not just our forests, but also our peatlands, our wetlands, grasslands, and marine habitats, through locally led projects that support communities. They encompass restoring degraded habitats, cleaning rivers and allowing them to meander again, and bringing microbes, plants, and animals back into damaged landscapes. Nature-based solutions involve sustainably managing our working lands and fisheries and replenishing soil health. For example, by growing trees among crops and planting more hedgerows. And nature-based solutions also include bringing nature into our towns and cities, with connected parks, allotments, green roofs, and ponds. But biodiversity must be at the foundation of all these activities, for it is only when ecosystems thrive that they can support people over the long term. And nature-based solutions can also only be sustained if they are designed and implemented by local communities, respecting indigenous knowledge, cultural traditions, and human rights. In this way, people and nature co-produce a variety of outcomes which benefit society, which in turn feed back to support biodiversity. Protecting nature can store carbon, whilst restoring it can draw greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, and in this way, nature-based solutions can help to slow climate change this century. Restoration of habitats on slopes and in catchments can store water and stabilise soils, protecting our homes and crops by reducing the risk of floods, erosion and landslides. Healthy coastal ecosystems are also crucial for protecting communities from the impacts of storm surges, saltwater intrusion and erosion. While in our towns and cities, trees in parks and along pavements provide shelter from the sun and rain and reduce peak temperatures during heat waves, and by bringing nature into our cities, we can also improve our mental and our physical health. Nature-based agricultural practices can help to sustain or even enhance yields, securing food supplies and ensuring clean drinking water is available year-round. Furthermore, the restoration of our lands and seas can generate valuable jobs and provide diverse livelihoods, while securing supply chains. And in this way, nature-based solutions can support economic recovery all over the world. Nature has diverse cultural values, including enjoyment of natural beauty and spiritual and religious connections, all the while bringing education, recreation, and health benefits. Through implementing nature-based solutions, people build stronger relationships, networks, and knowledge, which gives them the capacity to adapt and to be resilient in a rapidly changing world. All of these benefits and more support human well-being and biodiversity, which are, in turn, the foundation of sustainable development.
Forests cover 1/3 of all land on Earth and are a vital part of our global ecosystem. They provide timber, food, fuel and medicine for more than 1/3 of the world's population.
1 billion women depend on forests for their livelihoods, supporting their families and communities. Children also benefit from well-managed forests, as wood and non-wood forest products generate income which enables families to pay for food, healthcare, and sending their children to school. Forests and trees even make our cities better places to live. They are a source of cool, clean air and enrich our cities with healthy places to relax and unwind. As long as we use forests sustainably, they can help us make the economy greener, as wood is 100% renewable, and wood products have a smaller ecological footprint than alternatives, such as plastic and concrete. A wood-based economy can create new and better jobs in cities and in rural areas. Plus, when local and indigenous communities have secure rights to their forests, they can create businesses that benefit everyone. Forests also protect the natural environment. They absorb 2.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year, about 1/3 of the CO2 released from the burning of fossil fuels. Forested watersheds supply 75% of the world's accessible fresh water, used in homes and to irrigate farmlands downstream. And forests protect coastlines from erosion and inlands from floods and other natural disasters. Forests are home to 80% of the planet's animal and plant species. They are our life support system. We must manage forests sustainably, as it is forests that make sustainable development possible. It is forests that make life on Earth possible.
California's just experienced the second driest year on record. With our state's fluctuations between wet and dry, it's easy to think that the drought comes and goes. But the reality is, we're in an increasingly drying climate.
1977 was our worst drought on record, and this year was below it.
This last rain year, we received just about 48% of normal rainfall. We're running out of water.
Pumping costs went up exponentially this year in order to try to compensate for the lack of surface water. It's been catastrophic.
In the Navarro this year, we got down to 0 cubic feet per second. That is a first. If there's another year like this one next year, people will be going out of business. Farmers can't get the water for their crops and their trees. It's just been punishing.
Water shortages and devastating conditions are taking a toll on people and nature across our state, from the headwaters of the rivers we rely on to our coastal watersheds. When drought conditions strike, it's nature that suffers first. If we stay on this track, over half of California's freshwater species will face extinction in the next 100 years. due to intensifying cycles of drought and man-made water shortages.
One of the big things we can do is not pull water out of streams in that really critical late summertime. And it doesn't require a lot of storage just to get us through that dry part of the year and leave that water in the stream for the fish.
We can just add a little bit of water to keep pools connected for more days in any given dry season. We can effectively increase the probability of coho salmon survival. And in the face of climate change, that increased resiliency has benefits for every species in this watershed, including human beings, and I would argue in particular human beings.
What we need is the state and the federal government to help cut some of the red tape in terms of permitting. Step up with funding and planning now. We can't just be reactionary. The money needs to precede the problem, not follow it.
So what does California's future look like? Well, it's up to us. We know what needs to happen, and the California Salmon and Steelhead Coalition believes in a hopeful future.
One of the first things that we need is actually a clear scientific basis for a trigger for when we actually say, okay, we're getting such below average rainfall, we are going into a drought. We need to make sure that our permitting systems are fast and efficient for climate adaptation strategies and projects. We need to make sure that we have sufficient state funding to be able to fund the implementation of these projects. And if we really want to pick up the pace and scale of restoration, of climate resiliency solutions, we need to make sure that our agencies also have the resources to be able to be an effective and efficient partner.
It's just a question of finding the political will and the funding and the investment to get those changes made. And, you know, we can really see a bright future for California salmon and steelhead, and for people, frankly. I mean, we can get the water we need. It's just going to take a lot of will to get us there.
The bottom line is that we need California to take drought seriously. So what we're hoping to do is empower these agencies, both through funding and through a permanent drought unit, to make these changes more effectively, consistently, and efficiently, so that there's a long-term and a permanent solution at these agencies.
We can have a future where we have vibrant rivers, and we have healthy salmon runs, and we have reliable water supplies.
Hello, everyone. We're going to have a lightning talk about nature-based solutions and cities and how this can contribute to mobility and biological corridors for human health. As you might have heard, we are facing a triple series intertwined global challenges. These are climate change, biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, and sustainable development. Now, the problem with these challenges is that they will affect our daily life. For example, the food that we usually consume, the quality of water that we use, or affect our physical and mental well-being, of course, among many others. To address these challenges, nature-based solutions, or NBS, are proposed as one of the alternatives to protect ecosystems and their associated services. In other words, nature-based solutions have to be thought as, this is the key word, actions to restore, sustainable manage, and protect natural habitats, while at the same time bring benefits to people and to nature. In the context of urban areas, we have to place nature at the heart of our cities, in the places that we work, that we play, that we interact. When we talk about urban nature-based solutions, we're bringing nature back into our cities. And this not only gives benefits to ourselves, but also to our neighbors, to our children. We're creating places where we can develop physical activities and boost our mental health.
With these urban social ecological corridors, we aim to connect nature within cities and with surrounding ecosystems to improve urban climate resilience for healthy cities and communities. These corridors can support three main objectives. First, to promote nature-positive cities, where nature in cities regenerates rather than declines. Second, develop greener, safer, and healthier cities with equitable access for all. And third, bring back the connection between people and nature by implementing and highlighting the importance of nature in urban daily life. In practice, this involves the protection and restoration of key urban and peri-urban ecosystems that provide essential ecosystem services. Additionally, these corridors serve as avenues for bird species, pollinators, and mammals. Another benefit is soil permeability, since natural corridors allow water infiltration which helps prevent flooding. Urban social ecological corridors can also solve mobility issues in cities, providing benefits associated with temperature reduction in hot months, which allows the implementation of active mobility solutions, such as walking or cycling. Another associated benefit is the reduction of emissions by cycling or walking without burning fossil fuels, not to mention the accurate calculation of travel time, as there are no traffic jams in this type of system. Without the shade provided by trees in these corridors, walking and biking would be impossible at certain times of year.
A clear example of this is the Ronda del Sinú corridor in Montería, Colombia. This natural corridor has always been an important cultural, biological, and commercial area. However, in the later 20th century, it stopped being a commercial hub and became an illegal waste dump. It was until 2002 when the city began to restore this natural corridor to the splendor and importance that once had when the city was founded in the Sinú River bank 200 years ago. Several interventions occurred between 2002 and 2017 to transform this corridor into an urban park for recreational and ecological purposes. Currently, it has a great variety of flora and fauna, more than 7,000 trees that house and feed more than 20 animal species, including iguanas, monkeys, squirrels, sloths, and birds. Its construction has taken place in phases with a current length of 3.4 kilometers. It is also an important access for non-motorized travelers because its cycle infrastructure is protected by huge trees. Nowadays, around 20% of city trees are made by bicycle. The temperature in this corridor is about 10 degrees lower compared with the rest of the city, thanks to the shade of the trees. Montería is a good example of a city that remembers the natural elements of its landscape that generate the statement of the city in this particular location. The people of Montería reconcile with nature in their city.
Therefore, based on what Daniel and Paula have mentioned, we encourage local civil society and local governments to recover the natural and historical elements that provide identity as citizens of a specific urban area. All of this in order to spark action to conserve and enhance natural habitats. And secondly, we would like to call everyone to rethink the importance and role of nature in cities, not only to contribute to the biodiversity, climate, and sustainable development goals, but also this will help us reconnect with our cultural identities, as the example in Montería has shown. Lastly, we would like to thank everyone, and remember, together it's possible. Thank you.
Traditional medicine is widely used and increasingly relevant in the world today. Yet, it has been around for millennia. At a time when we were more in balance with our environment and in harmony with nature, we began looking into its healing powers to cure our aches and pains and discover our own remedies. Our understanding of traditional practices began to grow. Now over 80% of the world's population use traditional medicine. It's also the foundation for many modern medicines and practices. Some 40% of the approved pharmaceutical products in use today come from natural substances like tree barks and plant roots. So why don't national health strategies fully take all this into account? To answer these and other questions, we welcome the World Health Organization's new Global Center for Traditional Medicine. A bold new vision that starts in Jamnagar, Gujarat in India, but has a truly global reach. A center to support evidence and data, sustainability and innovation. bringing together the latest knowledge and technology to advance our understanding of methods already in use by billions of people. Catalyzing ancient wisdom and modern science has never been more needed as we strive towards our global health objectives to keep the world healthy and safe, to serve those in the most vulnerable situations, and promote good health and well-being for everyone. Let's take a bold new look at this most ancient and most modern practice. Welcome to WHO's Global Centre for Traditional Medicine.
Hi, this is Mohan Pargain, an Indian Forest Service officer from Telangana. Urbanization is an integral part of development. The economic development is followed by increase in demand for various goods and services, thus having a potential to provide socio-economic advantages and opportunities. Nearly half of the world population residing in urban areas generates 80% of the global domestic product, therefore having good capacity and rich potential to improve the well-being of our societies. As per United Nations World City Report, global areas are likely to increase from 55% to 68% by 2050. India's urban population is projected to reach 60% by 2050. It is expected that India will have 7 megacities by 2030, which will include Ahmedabad and Hyderabad, apart from existing megacities of New Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, and Bangalore. Urban green spaces like parks, forest, and community garden provide various kinds of ecosystem services and public health benefits, including psychological relaxation and stress reduction. The worsening climatic conditions, along with urbanization, are causing depletion and fragmentation of green spaces. The access to green space is also being recognized as an environmental justice issue. With rise in urban population, the per capita availability of green space in many urban areas has reduced drastically, and it is expected to decrease further. Nearly 70% of all greenhouse emissions come from urban-built environment, and the ever-increasing pace of urbanization is making this further worse. There have been various international meetings, conferences, and agreements targeting to improve the availability of access of green space. Sustainable Development Goal, that is SDG 11, seeks to make cities and communities sustainable. Urban green, being an excellent nature-based solutions, contribute for the development of sustainable, resilient, and inclusive cities. As per one study, the trees in megacities may save nearly $500 million per year due to their various environmental services. We need nearly 9 square meters of green space per person, beside access to public green spaces within 300 meters or a 5-minute walk from the houses of urban residents as per World Health Organization. Though many of the Western cities easily qualify for these norms, the condition of Indian cities regarding availability of required urban green space is quite inadequate, as the green spaces have good potential to meet the objectives of social and environmental sustainability, enabling policy and financial support to various initiatives can help to realize the full potential of green spaces in cities and towns. The newest Indian state, Telangana, has taken up various programs for all-round development of the state. One of such programs is Telangana Ku Harita Haram, or Green Garland for Telangana, a brainchild of visionary leader and Chief Minister Mr. K. Chandrasekhar Rao. This program is aimed to bring green cover of the state to 33% of its geographical area. For the first time, the role and responsibility of tree planting were distributed among all the government departments and local institutions instead of Forest Department under Harita Haram. By linking the programs of tree planting with livelihood and incentive, Harita Haram could result in wide acceptance and popularity among masses. Recent amendment to Panchayat and Municipal Acts with mandatory 10% budgetary allocation as green budget and accountability for survival of plantations have facilitated active role of people in Harita Haram program. With more thrust to tree planting in areas outside forests, these initiatives have contributed to improve the green cover in cities, towns, and villages with active involvement of municipality and village council, that is Gram Panchayats. Giving more emphasis to increase green cover in cities, 179 urban forest parks and urban forest blocks are being developed, including capital city of Hyderabad, covering nearly 71,000 hectare area. So far, 49 urban forest blocks have been opened for the public and 70 forest blocks are being treated under conservation and protection approach. Further, to meet the urbanization challenge of depletion of green cover in villages and towns, village nature park, locally called Palle Prakriti Banam, are being developed in each Gram Panchayat of the state with mandatory tree planting. Since 2021, village nature parks have been completed in 90,472 locations, covering nearly 5,005 hectares of area with an investment of nearly $30 million. The massive success of Palle Prakriti Banam has prompted the government of Telangana to take up Mega Village Nature Park, locally called Brihat Palle Prakriti Banam, in bigger chunk of areas to provide much needed green spaces. Nearly 5,900 hectares of land is proposed to be covered under 2,725 Mega Village Nature Parks with an investment of $4.5 million, and so far 1,384 such Mega Village Nature Parks have been completed. The Harita Haram program got further boost in the recently introduced concept of Green Fund, where people contribute voluntarily for conservation efforts and especially tree planting. The initiatives of state government got recognition in the recently released report of Forest Survey of India 2021. As per this report of Forest Survey of India, all 7 megacities witnessed poor decadal growth except for Hyderabad, which has witnessed a maximum 147% increase in forest cover. The per capita forest cover of Hyderabad rose from existing 4.3 to 8.3 square meter, which is near the recommended green cover of 9 square meter. With revolutionary policy interventions, strong financial and institutional arrangement, the Harita Haram program has become an excellent initiative to meet the present and future challenges of urban greens in Telangana. The urban parks and village nature parks are providing a living example of livable and functional alternatives for climate change adaptation and help to regulate the negative consequences of climate change. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Starry Sprinkle Hippolyte, the Restoration Science Director at Conservation International, and my talk is on trees in agriculture and natural climate solutions supporting food security. The Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions came out in Climate Week and is available online. You can see the address there. The roadmap is a guide which focuses on actions to be taken by people on the land, supported by public and private enabling actors to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2050. It contains 8 people-centered action tracks across categories of protection, climate-smart management, and ecosystem restoration. A transformation of food systems is at the heart of this work and necessary to achieve about 80% of the total mitigation opportunity. The roadmap has 5 key messages, and to get the first 3, you'll need to read the report or watch the Climate Week presentation. Links to both are there. But points 4 and 5 are highly relevant to us today, again, speaking to this transformation of food systems and the need to build coalitions to get this work done. These 3 tracks within the Manage pink category dominate the total natural climate solutions potential, partially because they cover 40% of the Earth's non-ice surfaces, and partially because modern agriculture is pretty bad for climate and the environment. And where it's most common in the global north, where people are practicing modern farming, you can see that that pink category dominates the overall NCS potential. So what do we need to do? You've probably heard of regenerative farming by now. It is the opposite of extractive, modern, industrial type farming that is heavily reliant on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. The Climate Smart Roadmap outlines regenerative practices such as reducing soil disturbance, sustainable grazing, agrobiodiversity, stopping chemical overuse and runoff, and agroforestry that are not just better for the environment, but have big climate implications. And you should notice who's pulling the arrow here. It's business people and politicians, and shows that much of what is happening in agriculture is driven by policy. And of course, any reforms that are to be made in the way that we farm needs to be informed by good science to ensure continued food security. So in this talk, I highlight the highest mitigation potential agriculture land-based solution, trees in agriculture, also known as agroforestry, which comes in many flavors and names and represents the largest part of the total potential in the climate smart category. You can see in the graph on the right that the total potential of trees in agricultural lands is much higher than compared to other regenerative practices like nutrient management, rotational grazing, etc. And I want to make sure we address concerns over food security in this. It's very important when you're talking about modifying agricultural systems, especially increasing tree cover. People get very worried about crop yields going down due to competition with the trees, crops getting displaced by trees. And so we want to be very clear that the roadmap and our ongoing research is really focusing on integrating just enough trees into croplands and pasturelands to promote carbon and economic benefits while maintaining agricultural productivity. And to do this, we really need to use the best available information on how trees affect crop yields. Research has been ongoing for decades in agroforestry systems around the world. And we've reviewed this literature and are asking experts who are doing applied research in real fields, like David Rivest, who's working in Quebec, who does research on crop yields in relation to lines of trees and has all the equipment installed to monitor and describe the growing environment around the trees, their effects on wind and light, and everything else that could impact crop production. So we're asking hundreds of experts like David about ideal tree arrangements, spacing, optimal densities of trees in agriculture for different agricultural systems, climates, and vegetation types. And this is without changing what is growing where, and of course, without reducing crop yields. So far, the preliminary data is very interesting. We're coming up with average recommendations of around 25% tree cover across tropical and temperate biomes, although this is lower in arid and Mediterranean climates. This should be achievable with no long-term yield losses because of the crop production benefits that agroforestry provides. Now, this is a broad global brushstroke. It's the first of its kind to incorporate input from agronomists and agroforesters, and we're looking forward to follow up on it with more detailed work in regions and more modeling and new data. A large part of the potential from trees in agriculture could be achieved by adding lines of trees along roads and the edges of fields, not displacing any agriculture. This is very exciting because it is agricultural leakage free and therefore of far less concern for food security or negative impacts to intact areas. This past summer, I visited the farm where David Rivest, on the right in the blue hat, is doing research with a fourth generation dairy farmer, Jacques Côté, on the far left of this picture. And I was very interested to see the way that Jacques himself, the farmer, was driving the research. He started out with trees as windbreaks on his farm and no scientists. He then became interested in planting more tree lines in his fields for better snow cover to protect his plants that were in permaculture over the winter, improve soil quality, and produce timber and nuts to diversify his farm income. And so it wasn't until 2012 that he started working with David to plant new lines of trees and then continuously monitor his crop yields in relation to the trees. He grows what he chooses to grow, primarily fodder for his cows. And so far, after 10 years of intensive monitoring, the systems have no measurable declines in the crop production. We polled our experts, asking them if trees are already present in agriculture, why are they there? And they cited many reasons. Not surprisingly, the top 5 all have to do with the farmer's financial bottom line and confirm what we already know, that trees can be good for agriculture in many important ways listed in the figure on the right. We asked our same group of experts what needed to happen to increase the incorporation of trees on farms. And besides more research done with farmers, they cite policy development and reform and carbon crediting and verification, ranking these higher than extension services or trainings or even free inputs like trees or tools. Realizing the huge climate potential within the managed category requires actions from all sectors, actions by farmers, livestock managers, and foresters. But if governments and businesses do not urgently step up to support them, to shift the status quo of ag as usual, we won't succeed. Transforming policy, especially farming subsidies, will be critical. While we continuously consider food security, but allow for climate-smart innovations in production and consumption, and even in our diets. It's clear that we must build strong coalitions to get this work done, linking science to practitioners. We are currently in the UN Decade on Ecological Restoration, and the role of agroforestry in landscape restoration is getting increasing recognition, especially in Africa with AFR 100. And while tree and agriculture practices are widespread in the global South, we have much to learn and apply in the global North to make it to our targets. I hope we can count you in for the challenge.
Thank you for this opportunity to present our work as part of this year's Nature for Life Hub. My name is Gail McGill, and today I'll be presenting on behalf of my collaborators, Dr. Eric Shivian and Ginny Park. We have been developing a new argument to promote the preservation of biodiversity. We can all agree that humanity faces significant engineering challenges in order to live sustainably on this planet. Some of these challenges include the storage and production of energy, heating, cooling, and ventilating our buildings, moving through air and water more effectively, and how to make the strongest, lightest, most biodegradable materials possible. But very few appreciate that the answers to these challenges have already been solved by the plants, animals, and microbes all around us. Consider that natural designs are so incredibly efficient because they have been refined over millions of years of evolutionary time. Only the successes remain. By this process of natural selection and elimination, nature has in effect done our engineering field trials for us, and we would be wise to listen. Take, for example, dragonflies. They are nature's oldest flyers and have been around for about 300 million years. Their acrobatics are unmatched by any other flying organism. How do they achieve such aerial agility? Let's focus on wing structure. Most of the time we are looking at dragonfly wings from the top. But if you look at cross-sections of that same wing, you notice that it's a corrugated surface with ridges and grooves. Scientists like Professor Akira Obata have realized that this corrugation, unlike an airplane wing, creates micro-vortices that spin within the grooves of the dragonfly wing. The vortices behave like miniature ball bearings that effectively create a fluid-on-fluid system that lubricates the wing surface and eases the flow of air, reducing drag. This has led Obata and others to design micro-wind turbines that have better performance at a wider range of wind speeds. They're more efficient at harnessing wind power, partly because they start spinning at lower wind speeds. Let's now turn to gliding and soaring birds. Birds have been models for flight for hundreds of years, but there are two features of gliding and soaring birds in particular that are having an impact on today's aviation industry: wingtips and slotted wingtips. When air flows over an airplane wing, there's a difference in air pressure between the bottom and the top of the wing. As the wing tilts upwards, known as the angle of attack, and generates lift, the air pressure under the wing is higher than that over the wing, and this difference creates a vortex at the tip of the wings. This swirling tunnel of air expands, results in increased drag, and translates to decreased fuel efficiency. You may have noticed that almost all commercial planes are now equipped with winglets, a bio-inspired design pioneered by Richard Whitcomb. It's estimated that these winglets have saved more than 10 billion gallons of fuel. That's like taking 20 million US cars off the road for a year, and reduced CO2 emissions by 105 million tons, which is like planting about 40 million acres of trees. Gliding birds have also slotted wingtips. Their wingtip feathers can come apart. You can see this in the turkey vulture picture on the left. And this also results in a series of smaller vortices that further reduce turbulence and drag. This feature is also being explored in the design of new airplanes. Water, like air, is also a fluid, and swimming organisms have much to teach us about how we can more effectively move through fluids. Take humpback whales, for example. These slow giants of the sea may in fact be one of the greatest acrobats of any marine animal for their size and weight. One behavior in particular showcases their abilities: bubble net feeding. The whales hunt in packs and encircle schools of fish by emitting a cylinder of bubbles that acts like a net. The fish are driven upwards towards the surface, and the feast begins. Up to half a ton of herring a day can be consumed by a whale using this method. During this behavior, the whales are making very tight turns in the water, banking at sharp angles and high speeds. Remember, these are 50-foot, 30-ton animals. How do they pull that off? Well, the secret to maintaining speed at such extreme angles is likely in the shape of their flippers. Along the leading edges of the pectoral flippers, like the one in this picture, you'll notice rounded swellings called tubercles. They have a scalloped appearance. What is it about these structures that allow whales to achieve high angles of attack in the water without stalling? Professor Frank Fish and others have studied the dynamics of flow over whale flippers and found that the flipper tubercles are creating small spinning vortices that are perpendicular to the axis of flow, which accelerate fluid flow over the flipper and pushes any turbulence backwards away from it. And this design has now been applied to several human-engineered products by the Whale Corporation, from turbine blades on the left to cooling microfans in computers on the right. Finally, I would like to address the argument that surely it is not necessary to save all organisms, since the natural designs we're referring to must exist many times over across families of species. For example, there are roughly 3,000 species of dragonflies alive today. How are these different, and do we really need all of them? Take, for example, the globe skimmer dragonfly on the left. It's capable of the longest non-stop flight of any insect, over 4,400 miles. Its rear wing seems to have a different aerodynamic design. But what do we really understand about the difference between these two species? Very little. If we lose one of them, we may never know which is the optimal design for our purposes. These examples and many more are available as part of a booklet we have recently published, and that is being distributed with the help of the United Nations. In closing, and as part of our other booklet on human health and biodiversity, I have to mention the role of human activity and biodiversity loss on the spread of infectious disease and specifically zoonotic diseases. These are diseases like HIV/AIDS and likely COVID-19 that have spilled over from wildlife to humans. Zoonotic viral transmission is driven not only by the vast wildlife trade for food and exotic pets, but also by deforestation, climate change, and more intense agriculture. As a result, we push animals out of their normal habitats into greater contact with people. It's estimated that 10,000 viral species capable of infecting humans currently circulate silently in wildlife. So let us learn the lessons from the tragedy of the recent pandemic and share an awareness of the importance of biodiversity, not only for our health, but also for our ability to find solutions to the engineering challenges that will enable a more sustainable future. As the former Director General of the World Health Organization said, the Library of Life is burning, and we do not even know the titles of the books, much less what is in them. If we continue to cause the extinction of species at the current rate, we risk losing the treasure trove of natural designs that nature's biodiversity provides us in order to meet today's engineering challenges. Therefore, we have no choice but to protect biodiversity, and in doing so, to protect ourselves. It is not just the right thing to do, it is a matter of survival. I want to thank everyone who was involved in helping us develop this material and encourage you to download our booklets from our website, naturestoolkit.com. Thank you.
Protecting, restoring, and sustainably managing nature is essential for achieving our goals on climate mitigation and adaptation. In fact, nature-based climate solutions are the most cost-effective solution that we have for tackling climate change, and they provide so many co-benefits to society. In this segment, we'll hear about how different groups are working on nature-based climate solutions.
There were 16 million trees at Easter Island when a group of Polynesian explorers first walked on its shores, probably around the year 1200. The island is small, so it must have been incredibly lush and green and a beautiful place. But in 1776, when James Cook came on a British ship, there were no trees left. They had all been logged, cut down. The trees had been used to build boats for fishing, which was crucial to survival. But without trees, the 10 to 15,000 people who lived there could not build any new boats. They could no longer fish. And without trees, the soil was left unprotected against the harsh elements of the Pacific Ocean, the rain, the strong winds, and the erosion. The soil was barren, and the society quickly collapsed into famine and conflict. This story has been told by the American biologist Jaron Diamond in his book Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Survive. And I remember wondering when I read this, what was he thinking? Whoever felled the last tree on Easter Island. Maybe he didn't think. Maybe he did it out of habit or to save his family. Maybe he was desperate. We cannot know. What makes the story of Easter Island special today? It is that it is in many ways an image of the time we live in. We are facing multiple crises: the nature and climate crisis, energy and food shortage, and much of our own making. For the first time in history, humanity is at the risk of destroying the foundation of our existence, not only a small island. But we also have the ability to change that course. And this is what nature-based solutions is about, teaming up with nature and placing nature at the center of sustainable development. Norway has supported the protection of the world's most biodiversity-rich forests for more than a decade through the government of Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative, NICFI. NICFI's main tool is results-based, predictable and adequate funding in order to reduce emissions from deforestation. The intention is to change the economic logic in favor of the climate and the forests. NICFI also works to protect forests by making the people that depend on it, whether it is indigenous peoples or local agricultural communities, its strongest defenders. Working to protect forests also bring results, such as in Indonesia, which has reported the lowest rate of deforestation in 20 years. And in the Congo Basin, where DRC has signed an ambitious partnership for protection of its forests. In DR Congo, the main driver behind deforestation is small-scale agriculture. Not ill will, not a destructive human nature, but, like on Easter Island, the need to support families, grow food, collect firewood. The intensive for human survival are not on nature's side, until now. A change is coming. The Central African Forest Initiative, CAFI, brings together 6 forest countries' governments and 9 donors in a $500 million fund. In DRC, over 220,000 people in deforestation areas are engaged in a more sustainable and productive agricultural practice. The yields have increased and household revenues doubled. The rainforests of the world are one of the ecosystems that has to be protected and restored to stay within the 1.5 degree scenario and to bend the curve on nature loss. We too often take nature for granted, even if humanity depends on nature for absolutely everything. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, the air we breathe in, the medicines that save lives. The future needs to bring nature-based solutions to the multiple crises the world is facing. One small, but in my opinion, brilliant example of how we can team up with nature instead of destroying it is the black soldier fly. This tiny little larva, the black soldier fly, has an enormous appetite for organic waste. Every day, it consumes twice its body mass. It eats our waste, which could otherwise end up in large landfills. In a matter of weeks, after feasting on food waste, the larva, when dried, can be used as animal feed or as fertilizer. It is low-tech and can be set up on a small farm without taking up a lot of space, maybe 1 or 2 square meters. In many cases, it is cheaper than imported animal feed. So to sum up, this little fly can reduce food waste, reduce dependence on imported animal feed, and thereby free up land that can be used to grow food for humans, increase food production and food security, create jobs, and reduce emissions and pressure on nature. I know it sounds too good to be true, but it is now many places in Africa and on other continents, also in Norway. This tiny insect can become a real game changer for the absolutely necessary transition of our food production. And again, making nature do its work, providing ecosystem services to the benefit of us all. I call myself an empirical optimist. I don't believe that it is human nature to destroy the foundation of our existence. And let me substantiate. Humanity has shown that when faced with massive crises, whether natural disasters, war, pandemics, we have it in ourselves to solve them. The essence is to acknowledge the actual challenge we are faced with. What makes the nature crisis different is that it's slow, gradual, and it's global. Not one large incident that demands our attention. Understanding the nature crisis demands more of us intellectually. To acknowledge the size of the crisis we are facing and the intrinsic value of nature and the value of nature-based solutions. The seed I want to plant in all of you as you log off today and leave the conference is this. What is my role? How can I, from where I work, contribute to strengthening an alliance for nature, with nature? With whom can I join forces? All of you are each other's best allies in the quest to ensure that the fate of Easter Island will not be the fate of humanity, that we team up with nature. Thank you for listening.
Earth's climate is changing. There has been almost 1 degree Celsius of warming since pre-industrial times, and this is causing glaciers to retreat, ice caps to melt, and sea levels to rise. Moreover, there is evidence that this warming is increasing the frequency and intensity of droughts, floods, crop failures, of fires and storms right across the globe. How do we adapt to such rapid environmental change? How do we thrive in the face of these challenges? And how do we adapt and thrive in such a way that slows further change? In many parts of the world, the dominant approach to dealing with the hazards of climate change has been static engineered interventions, such as sea walls, wells, and irrigation infrastructure. These can be very expensive, but very effective, at least in the short term. However, in many situations, nature can provide a more affordable long-term solution. Humans have harnessed nature to buffer the impacts of climate variability for millennia, but it is only recently that evidence and awareness has grown that the restoration and protection of nature can not only safeguard biodiversity, but also help people adapt to the effects of climate change. Moreover, by absorbing and storing carbon, these nature-based solutions can slow further warming on a global scale. So let's now take a specific example. Coastal habitats, such as coral reefs, seagrass meadows, and mangrove forests, protect coastlines from the damaging effect of wave erosion and tropical storms. They slow the intrusion of salt water that can damage crops and livestock. They safeguard biodiversity and provide a wide range of ecosystem services. In other words, they protect and support communities in the face of climate change. Moreover, healthy mangroves absorb and store large amounts of carbon. However, when these ecosystems are damaged or destroyed, for example, when mangroves are converted to shrimp farms, when overfishing, boats, and bleaching damages coral reefs, communities are exposed to the full fury of storms and sea level rise. They lose their property and their crops, and they have fewer natural resources to support alternative livelihoods. An engineered solution to the problem of degraded or destroyed coral reefs is to place concrete balls reinforced with microcilia in the waters to allow photosynthesis and planktonic life to regenerate in degraded areas. While effective in regulating the action of waves and reducing damage to coastlines, biological diversity is very low around concrete, and the balls do not provide any other benefits to society. The nature-based alternative is to manage and restore the ecosystem and maintain biological richness. A teeming reef provides habitat, spawning, and nursery grounds for economically important fish species. It can provide jobs and income to local economies from fishing, from recreation, and tourism. It is also a vital source of medicine and has great cultural value. And of course, the high genetic diversity it harbours gives future generations many options. Now, the restoration of coral reefs is just one example of a nature-based solution to climate change. Others include agroforestry to stabilise crop yields in drier, more variable climates, and forest restoration in river catchments to secure water supplies and protect communities from flooding, erosion, and landslides. And as with the reefs, restoring nature in this way also protects vital life support systems and slows the rate of change. It increases our well-being and makes us resilient and adaptive in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, nature is our closest ally in the fight against the causes and the consequences of climate change, and we can only develop sustainably by taking its full value into account. So let us work together to make sure that nature is central to decision-making in business and in government for the benefit of people and planet.
The 2020s, things were never the same after that. That's when we saved the world. Only we almost didn't.
It all changed once we realized the difference working with nature could make. Back then, we were all about electric cars, renewable energy, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. And they were all crucial, but on their own, they never would have been enough. We were already facing an extinction-level threat. We thought we were doing a lot, but we needed to do even more. Enter nature. The most sophisticated system for processing greenhouse gases in the universe only had hundreds of millions of years on us. We had to stop the planet from warming more than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the start of the 20th century. Turns out we had to be kind to nature. Hear me out. Stopping the destruction of existing forests, grasslands, and wetlands pulled 3.9 billion metric tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. Smarter farming and forestry techniques cut another 5.1 billion tons. And restoring the forests and wetlands we had lost scrubbed another 2. That's 11 billion tons of carbon removed from the atmosphere. That's like a string of SUVs stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic stretching from here to the moon 56 times over. That's 1/3 of the emission reductions we needed. How's it work, though? Pick a tree. Any tree. Look closer. Trees do this awesome thing called photosynthesis where they soak up rays of sun and pluck carbon from the air to feed themselves. They literally eat the stuff that traps heat in our atmosphere. And have you heard of mangroves? They're like trees, but they live along the coast near bays and beaches. They became all the rage when word got out they could store 5 times more carbon than their landlocked counterparts. Plus, as they age, trees, all plants really, deposit their carbon into soil. Other plants use that to grow, some of which get eaten by animals, like us, which release carbon back into the atmosphere, starting the whole process over again. It's called the carbon cycle. And it worked really well for a really long time until we overloaded the system by burning fossil fuels and cutting down too many of our forests. It can look very natural now, but protecting and restoring nature at a global level was one of the hardest things we've ever done, and we still had to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. But once we realized it would take more than switching to renewable energy, once we really partnered with nature to reduce our carbon footprint, and also to live on a better planet,
That's when we really started to save the world.
Hello and welcome to our fireside chat on nature positive national adaptation plans for the Nature for Life Hub. We are from the team in Costa Rica that has been implementing the Essential Life Support Areas methodology, and or the ELSA maps. And we are recording this video to present to you our work here in Costa Rica on adaptation to climate change and the use of this methodology to enhance this process. With me are Carlos Cordero. He is the director of the Secretariat of Sectorial Planning in the Ministry of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Also, Enrique Paniagua, he is a policy expert at UNDP, and Cornelia Miller, who is the director of the PRIAS laboratory at the National Center of High Technology, and our host today. We are here together in her office. Thank you for inviting us, Cornelia. And I want to introduce myself too. I'm Rafael Monge. I work as director of the National Center of Geoenvironmental Information at the Ministry of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, and I'll be the moderator of this conversation. So let's start. Carlos, you're in charge of the coordination of planning processes for environment in the sector of environment and technology and environment and energy in Costa Rica. Can you tell us why adaptation to climate change or how adaptation to climate change and national planning is linked in our country?
Thank you, Rafael. In Costa Rica, sectoral strategic planning is directly linked to adaptation to climate change. Currently, we have the National Policy for Adaptation to Climate Change and the National Plan for Adaptation to Climate Change, both closely linked to the National Risk Management Plan. So these three important public policies tools are included in the National Development Plan 2023-2026, which is the most important national planning tool of each government. In fact, this gives us as an idea of the importance of adaptation to climate change within the national priorities for the coming years in our country. The National Development Plan is reviewing every 6 months in the Environmental Sector Council, and all the ministers and directors of the environment sector review the progress, but also the delays to ensure compliance. On the other hand, we currently have in the review phase the first sector plan for the environment and energy 2030, which contains a complete access dedicated to climate change and adaptation. This will make it possible to include adaptation to climate change within the sectoral objectives and in short and medium-term planning tools. Finally, it is important to emphasize that these public policy and strategic planning tools are based on scientific evidence, which is crucial for the high-level decision in this moment and in this global situation.
Thank you, Carlos, for that explanation. It's very important that we have all these instruments implemented. Enrique, sorry, you actively participated in the generation of the National Adaptation Plan of Costa Rica, and also in the process of generating ELSA maps in our country. Can you tell us how this process was and its results?
Of course. Thank you very much, Rafa. Well, first, to answer this question, it's important to understand the hierarchy of public policies here in Costa Rica. So in order to have a national plan, we first need a policy, right? So in this case, Costa Rica created its climate adaptation policy in 2018 and needed a national plan to operationalize the policy. So it wasn't until 2021 Costa Rica started this process of generating this plan. And the Directorate of Climate Change of the Ministry of Environment took the leadership, and along with UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, developed a process to create the National Adaptation Plan. So it was a long period. It was like 11 months of process, to create this plan, and it involved a lot of analysis, a lot of consultation with national experts, national institutions, social society, and a wide number of stakeholders that participated in this process. And at the end, we obtained the NAP as a result. But in the middle of the creation of this plan is also ELSA process. It was part of the creation of the NAP. So ELSA run kind of in parallel of the creation of the plan, and we basically foster a whole scientific analysis to understand how nature can support the increasing of climate or the increasing of climate resilience for the country, and how to translate those results into public policy that is the NAP. And that's how very widely how we created the NAP.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Well, you have mentioned the ELSA maps, and this is a project that Costa Rica has been developing for identifying essential life support areas. And well, last year, Costa Rica worked in an iteration of this ELSA map focused on adaptation. Cornelia, you have been working with Costa Rica ELSA mapping as our scientific focal point. Can you tell us about the science behind this process and how the development of the ELSA map is connecting science and public policy in Costa Rica?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for being here. Hello, everyone. Well, yes, this is very interesting because there is a bridge between politics and science with the opportunity to work with ELSA maps. So we have the spatial data. We have the data sets that the country has been collecting in the different institutions, public and private, and from the academic sector, which is the one that I belong to. And then we have the public policies. This is the compass, and all the scientific knowledge goes to this compass to help the country decision makers to have material or a tool to make the wisest decisions for protect, restore, and manage the different efforts the country is doing regarding environment. So this has been like a great experience to have this compass and work with something as abstract, like a public policy with the spatial data that gives us all these opportunities to work with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cornelia. Very interesting work that Costa Rica has been developing. Thanks for all your efforts. Okay. In this chat, we have been speaking about the connection between the national planification and sectoral planification, and how Costa Rica is planning its adaptation to climate change and using science in these processes. But now let's talk about impact. How can we achieve a greater impact? Carlos, how can we bring the planification of adaptation of climate change beyond the environmental sector?
Thank you, Rafael. That's an important question. First, I think we must extend adaptation to climate change to the infrastructure and mobility sector. Costa Rica has been doing important efforts to include adaptation to climate change within the construction and means of transport, but we need more. We need to transfer the successful model of management, protection, and conservation of green infrastructure to all kinds of infrastructure, gray, blue, orange, all. In addition, we need to create more extensive governance mechanisms, which include the private sector and citizens with greater participation. And finally, adaptation to climate change must exist in all public policies and planning tools of all sectors, and not to see this issue as exclusive to the environmental sector.
Well, that's a big challenge, Carlos, and I know you have been working hard to achieve this. And well, Enrique, do you think that the country has what it takes to implement the National Adaptation Plan? What are our main challenges to do this?
Thank you, Rafa. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face now is having the resources to implement, to execute the actions that we already have in the NAP. So when we developed the NAP, we basically allowed the stakeholders to formulate actions that are that have some funds already from these institutions, but other actions that are that they cannot cover with the current funds in the public institutions. And we did it that way because we know that there is a financial gap, important financial gap, that the public institutions cannot face in this moment. But we know that we do have the technical capacity to bring those resources to the country, and that we can find those, actually part of those resources in the country from the private sector. So that's a big need in this moment, is to really bring the resources, the financial resources, to enforce the actions that are in this NAP. I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have at this moment. Thank you.
Well, Enrique, well, that is not a small challenge. There are many actions in the NAP, and many important ones too. And it would be great that we can achieve all of these activities all together. But I think that also science can help us to achieve this, and Earth observations as well as the use of mapping we have been working with the ELSA map in Costa Rica. Cornelia, do you think that the country is basing its decision-making processes on science, on the use of Earth observations? Do you think that is being done already, or do we need to work more for this part?
Thank you, Rafael. I think this is a very interesting question and a powerful one. I think now the world is more in the digital era. We have more resources of spatial data, and the country has proved with ELSA that we have data that is worth to use in scientific purposes and serving the public policy. So I think in this exercise, with all these intersectorial efforts of coordination, negotiation, and collaboration, it's an opportunity to make it grow, and that we all as an institutions of one country help ourselves to make better decisions regarding sustainability. And the one challenge we have is funding. There should be more funding for Earth observations projects if we really want, as a country, to be a country based in Earth observations. And the proof is that if ELSA is giving a good opportunity to decision makers to use it as a tool to enhance the work of all the persons that need to take action towards these public policies, then it's a good idea that the country invests in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia. You're very inspired. And well, let's have this final question to close this chat. And I want to analyze with you, colleagues, how can we integrate nature spatial analysis into climate adaptation plans? And Enrique, do you want to take this final question?
Of course, thank you, Rafa, for this question. I think is vital to understand this process, because this is kind of the center of everything, how we translate those results into policy, right? So I think first, national adaptation plans need to recognize the importance of nature for climate adaptation, right? That's a must. And then we can say that nature-based solutions offer cost-effective options to address climate impacts, right? And that's why national adaptation plans should really consider them as options. Then a national or a spatial analysis needs to take place to understand where nature can help the most in increasing resilience to climate events. That's the second step. Then thinking about including the spatial results into the NAPs, it is vital that the institutions that will be responsible of executing the nature-based solutions in these NAPs are part of the spatial analysis process itself. If the institutions are involved in this process, it is more likely that they trust the results, and then they will translate these results into policy actions. So the final process is precisely engaging those institutions in the creation of a specific policy actions that will be part of the NAP. The institutions not only need to agree to the actions, but they should be part of the creation of those actions and to commit to the execution of them. As the institutions know about the spatial analysis, and they have been part of this process, and then they trust the results, and therefore it's likely that they will bring the scientific results to the policy actions and formulate actions based on these scientific results. But it does require negotiations to and co-creation with the responsible institutions to make sure that the spatial results are translated into the climate adaptation policy actions. And this is how we integrate nature spatial analysis into national adaptation plans.
Thank you, Enrique, for that answer. Let's do this. If you want to know more about the ELSA maps, we invite you also to look at the previous recordings from the Nature for Life Hub, where we have been participating and also sharing these processes. It has been a great experience to have been working with you in the ELSA mapping in Costa Rica, and also producing this video today for Nature for Life Hub 2022. Thanks to everyone that has connected to the event or that is going to see it later. And we hope that you are inspired too with our work. And if you have any questions or you want to follow up this conversation, please reach out to us, to our emails or social networks, and we'll be happy to chat again. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
In August 2022, President Biden signed the most ambitious climate bill in U.S. history, nearly $370 billion to supercharge clean energy investment and slash planet-warming greenhouse gases. Worldwide, a transition to a clean energy future is underway, and swift action is paramount to keep 1.5 degrees of warming within reach. But even with a rapid shift to clean energy, there is no path to a safe climate future without nature. Accelerating action to protect, manage, and restore Earth's natural ecosystems and working lands is necessary to bridge the gap. The good news is there is a growing consensus on the need to invest in these natural climate solutions. Now people are looking for a way. The Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions is a first-of-its-kind plan to maximize emissions reduction and carbon storage from the world's grasslands, wetlands, and forests, and crucially, the farms, grazing lands, and timberlands that grow our food and fiber. It's built around a novel, straightforward yardstick, the carbon law for nature. This new benchmark, grounded in what the latest science tells us must be achieved and what can be achieved cost-effectively, says that we must reach net zero emissions from the land sector by 2030 and collectively achieve a 10 gigaton sink by 2050. It's an ambitious target, but the roadmap demonstrates a realistic path to achieving it through an interconnected set of 8 action tracks, centered around the people who live and work on the land, and supported by businesses, policymakers, social movements, and the finance sector. Together, the action tracks deliver 3 critical outcomes on the necessary timeline: protecting natural lands by preventing deforestation and other destructive activities, and better managing working lands like farms and ranches with practices that boost carbon storage and maintain productivity at the same time, so that we can restore damaged ecosystems to once again store carbon. These measures are not only good for the climate, they also protect wildlife, promote health, grow local economies, and build resilience in the face of a rapidly changing world. Of course, none of these actions reduce the need for a rapid transition away from fossil fuels. But by detailing who needs to act, how quickly, and where, the Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions shows that everybody has a role to play in stewarding nature to help maintain a stable climate, giving us an historic opportunity to leave our planet better than we found it by pursuing these actions urgently, transparently, and inclusively. Join us as partners on this journey.
I'm Michael Wallison, the Managing Director of the NCS Roadmap Initiative for Conservation International's Moore Center for Science. I'll be sharing with you some of the key findings and messages from a new report called the Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions. But before I start on the details of the report, we need to set the stage a bit. First, to say that this project and this report have been a partnership, and we've been working very closely with partners at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, at the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and at World Wildlife Fund. And second, we have to ground this discussion in the broader moment for climate action. The recently published IPCC 6th Assessment Report highlighted 2 critical facts that we need to keep in mind right now. First, that the window to a safe climate landing is closing, but it is still open. We need to find the ways to climb through that window as rapidly as we possibly can. The second point that the IPCC report made crystal clear is that nature must be a major part of the solution. We cannot keep the climate to 1.5 degrees of warming with an energy and industry transition alone. We could turn off all of the coal and gas power plants tomorrow, and we would still exceed 1.5 degrees unless we change the pathway for nature. Let's first turn to that 1.5 degree pathway for nature. We're introducing in this report a new concept that we've called the carbon law for nature. This carbon law for nature incorporates the latest science into a new pathway for mitigation and emissions from the entire land and agriculture sector. This carbon law for nature is a component of Johan Rockström's carbon law that he introduced in 2017. The carbon law, as Johan introduced it, has been a powerful and important milestone that moved the incentive structure for policy, for business, and for finance to stop thinking so far into the future, 2050 is not where we need to focus our energies or setting our climate targets. We need to cut that problem into manageable steps. Where do we need to be in 2030? Where do we need to be in 2025? And this notion of cutting the problem into steps and of exponential growth of solutions between each of those steps is a critical driving factor in accelerating climate ambition and action. And we've tried to do the same thing here with nature that Rockstrom did with energy and industry. While cutting emissions in half every decade, which is the carbon law, will be sufficient to keep 1.5 degrees within reach for the energy and industrial sectors, the nature sector, the land sector, is different and can and must do more. We need to get from 12.5 gigatons of net CO2 emissions per year in 2020, where we've been in the last decade, to net zero greenhouse gas emissions for all agriculture and land by 2030, and then become a 5 gigaton sink by 2040 and a 10 gigaton sink by 2050. This pathway is incredibly challenging, but we can break it down and make it more manageable. First, by looking at sources and sinks separately. When we break down net emissions from land, we actually see 23 gigatons of gross emissions from land, while at the same time, land is sequestering 10.5 gigatons per year in other parts of the world. So 23 gigatons of gross source combined with 10.5 gigatons of sink equals that 12.5 gigatons I showed in the previous slide. And if we can drop gross emissions from land, that includes deforestation, it includes wetlands that are dried up and emitting methane. If we can drop that from 23 gigatons per year in 2020 to 17 gigatons in 2030, and then 15 and 14 in 2040 and 2050, while at the same time increasing sinks from where we are now at 10.5 gigatons of reforestation, of forest restoration, of land and wetland restoration in some parts of the world, if we can expand that to 17 gigatons by 2030 and onward through 2040 and 2050, that gets us to the carbon law for nature. 17 gigatons of sink and 17 gigatons of source in 2030, that's balance. That is net zero. That's what we need to hit. And we can do it by breaking it down into steps. The roadmap for those steps is what I'd like to talk about next. Our roadmap for natural climate solutions introduces 3 innovations. We just talked about the first one, the carbon law for nature, which sets a new destination for all land and agriculture. The second innovation is a shift in focus for the science of natural climate solutions, from a focus on land types of forest or wetland to a focus on people. Who is on that land? A lot of the science, great science that's been done in this field by colleagues like Bronson Griscom and Stephanie Rowe at WWF and others, has focused on our areas of expertise. And many of us are ecologists. We're often forest ecologists, and we've been thinking for years, decades even, about the opportunities for forests to increase the amount of carbon they hold on to reduce the amount of carbon that's being released from those forests worldwide. But we need to change our focus to people on the land. It's not the land types that are going to capture the solutions, it's the people. And we need to understand who needs to make changes on the ground and what it is that they can do to change the pathway for emissions from nature. We also need to focus on the enabling actors, the social movements, the governments, the businesses, the financial sector that will enable those changes on the ground by the foresters and farmers and livestock managers that are managing our working lands, by the indigenous peoples and local communities whose land rights are critical to their cultures, to their well-being, and to carbon emissions, and to the public land managers who are helping us find the next places to protect and how to do that in ways that protect people and economies at the same time as land. This shift in focus to people will help unlock the solutions that we need and accelerate those solutions by focusing on who needs to do what, where, and how fast. So breaking this problem down is the second big innovation with a focus on people. When we focus on people, a new set of solutions emerges. And these are what we've called action tracks in this report. These action tracks are groups of solutions generally focused on specific actors. What we've done here is we've arrayed these solution sets from three major categories: protection on the left, protection of natural ecosystems in particular, management of working lands, of the forests, farms, and grazing lands that we grow our materials, our fiber, our food, and our feed, and then the restoration of natural ecosystems on the right. I want to point out that this perspective, this protect, manage, and restore perspective, is a land use perspective, especially when we're looking at management and restoration. A lot of people would put mitigation opportunities that we have here in pink as management. They would actually call that restoration. If we restore the carbon in the soil and the health of the soil, even if that's on farmland or grazing land, many folks reasonably consider that restoration. Here, we've limited restoration to a conversion from a working land or degraded land back into the natural ecosystem that belongs in that place. So these categories here, the climate smart forestry, the IPLC rights and resources, the climate smart farming, new protected areas, no deforestation supply chains, these focus on people. Who on the ground needs to make the change, and what are the outcomes of those changes? Can we do forestry in a way where foresters or the owners or managers of forest land protect that land from conversion more assiduously, where a forester has the incentive to prevent agriculture from expanding into their land, because now farming trees, or at least harvesting trees from a natural ecosystem, even better, is now worth their time to defend. That is making them a living. Can we graze lands in a way that restores the carbon into the soil instead of degrading those lands further? Can we farm lands in a way that introduces legumes into the mix and restores the soils while increasing the incomes of farmers and people on the land? These circles are sized according to the gigatons of CO2 mitigation opportunity in 2030, and we need to get moving on all of them to get where we're going. One of the main take-home messages of our report is that food systems are critical to unlocking the opportunity from natural climate solutions. So these are the same 8 action tracks, the same 8 solutions that I showed you on the previous slide, but here they're arrayed in terms of those that are closely linked to food systems on the left and those that are less linked on the right. And what we've learned in this research is that 80% of the mitigation opportunity in 2030 is closely linked to the food system, either by changing the way we grow our food in working lands through farming, through grazing, whether it's through diet shift and food waste that changes demand, changes what we grow on those lands, or whether it's through protection of natural ecosystems that are currently lost through expansion of agriculture. The way we run our food systems, the food waste we allow throughout those supply chains, and the choices we make on what we choose to eat and what we choose to feed our families are critical, and we have to take that into account. So I talked about 2 innovations in this report, and now I'd like to talk about the third. The first was the Carbon Law for Nature, a new destination. The second was focusing on people instead of ecosystem types. And the third innovation is putting all of this action on a timeline. So this slide is showing us the acceleration of protection, of climate smart management, and of restoration that we need between now and 2050 to meet the rigors of the Carbon Law for Nature. We've outlined an acceleration where protection moves fastest, and that's based on good science by folks like Susan Cook Patton at the Nature Conservancy. They, in that paper, laid out a hierarchy of natural climate solutions mitigation. And we have to do protection first. Just like we reduce, then reuse, then recycle, we need to reduce the amount of land that we're gobbling up in our agriculture systems. We need to protect what we have and keep it. We also need to use what we're already using better. We need to take the farmland, the forestry lands that we're already using to produce the goods humanity needs, and we need to do that in ways that sequester carbon into those lands rather than emitting carbon and other greenhouse gases from those lands. And then recycle. Recycle's last. Restoration is the most expensive of these three opportunities. Protection is the least expensive. And restoration is also the one that takes the longest. If you plant a tree tomorrow, the carbon sequestration from that tree is going to take decades to reach its maximum. So first we need to protect, then we need to accelerate management, and then restoration that we start today and tomorrow will start to grow over time. We need to do all three of these. So protect, manage, and restore. We haven't just focused these opportunities on acceleration curves. We've also looked at the geography of natural climate solutions. And I'm showing you here just an example of the richness of information that is underlying this report. This synthesis report, the Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions, is a report that has synthesized the latest decade of scientific literature, and there is very rich, explicitly spatial information about all of these mitigation opportunities. In this map, I'm just showing the regional opportunities in 2030 from protection, from management, and from restoration of natural ecosystems. And a few things jump out to me. First of all, many folks who've worked on climate change will know that we are losing our tropical forests in the three major parts of the tropics where those forests lie. In the Brazilian Amazon, in the Congo Basin in Africa, and on the Malay Peninsula in Southeast Asia. So the big chunks of protection opportunity lay in those three major tropical forest basins. I think some folks would be surprised the extent to which we have mitigation opportunity from natural climate solutions around the entire world, everywhere there's productive land, anywhere there's farmlands in the major breadbaskets of the world, in Europe and Eurasia, in North America, and also in these parts of the tropics where there are significant areas of grazing lands and croplands. In all of those places, we can change the way we're managing working lands. The restoration opportunity is a little more evenly distributed throughout the planet. It seems small on here. I want to remind you that's partly because of where we draw the lines between restoration and management, but it's also because this is focused on 2030, because we need to get moving now. And even if we get started on those restoration opportunities now, they'll take a while to bear fruit. So this geography is the kind of rich information that the Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions will help policymakers make decisions about where to put their investments. It will help the finance industry decide where to fund the next project, and it will help businesses know where in their supply chains they need to look for opportunities to flip from a source to a sink. So I want to just step back for a moment and remind this audience of our key messages. We really have 5 take-home messages, and I've mentioned them all, but I want to reiterate. First, to keep 1.5 degrees within reach, the Carbon Law for Nature requires the land sector to reach net zero by 2030 and a 10 gigaton sink of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The Carbon Law for Nature is a universal yardstick. It is a measure of ambition that actors at every scale, businesses, finance, countries setting their NDC targets, can use to ask and then monitor whether they're doing enough in the land sector to keep the climate to 1.5 degrees. Third, our Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions charts the path for achieving the Carbon Law through nature by protecting healthy ecosystems, cutting their loss in half every 5 years for the next decade, by managing 2 billion hectares of working lands smarter by 2030, and by restoring ecosystems over 350 million hectares by 2050. Fourth, a transformation of food systems is at the heart of natural climate solutions, while at the same time enhancing global food security. Fifth, the effort to deliver natural climate solutions is is focused on people. We need to all get involved. It requires everyone to deliver what's needed. And we invite all of you to join us in this effort. Lastly, I'd like to focus a little bit on where we're going next. So this report that we released at New York Climate Week on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in September is really just one step on a much longer journey. We will be pushing forward on this roadmap initiative, both within Conservation International and inviting our partners, as I just invited you all, to join us on this journey to get to where we need to go. We're focused on 4 different parts of the puzzle, all of which need to proceed in coalition with others. First, there's still basic science that we need to do. We need to better understand how to monitor soil carbon, for example, or we need to understand what benefits we get for biodiversity if we follow the roadmap for carbon. Second, we actually need to get out into the world. We're already doing it, but we need to make sure that we're targeted on where we're doing the next tranche of natural climate solution actions so that we can gather the evidence that we need through randomized controlled trials, through actually gathering evidence and filling evidence gaps where they still remain, so that investors, countries, companies have the confidence to know that the actions they take will bear fruit. Next, we need to provide the tools, the decision support framework and structure that these actors can use to identify opportunities and to make the decisions about where to put their time, energy, and money. And then lastly, we need to bring the carbon law for nature into the broader conversation by bringing it into contexts like the UNFCCC, the negotiations, and by just getting out and talking to people about what the science is telling us, as we're doing today. So thank you very much for your interest in our exponential roadmap for natural climate solutions. I hope you'll look up the report and dive in a little deeper. And thank you again.
The Yaida Eyasi Landscape Project is a nature-based solution run by the indigenous communities who have lived in this region of northern Tanzania for thousands of years.
Wananchi katika bonde la Yaida pamoja na jamii za bonde la Yaida ambao wengi wao ni wawindaji na wakusanyaji, yani Wahadzabe, na wengine ni wafugaji ambao ni Wadatoga. Kwa jina naitwa Isaac Bryson. Mimi ni meneja wa mradi wa carbon katika bonde la Yaida. Hizi jamii zimejiwekea utaratibu wa kutunza misitu. Wanatunza misitu kwa kufuata utaratibu wa matumizi bora ya ardhi waliojiwekea katika vijiji vyao.
Kuna maeneo yamegawanywa kwa matatu. Kuna sehemu ya misitu ambayo ni malisho ya mifugo, kuna makazi na kilimo kidogo kidogo, pia na maeneo ya mbuga ambayo ni sehemu ya pili ya malisho.
Wao ndio wazawa, ndio walioshiriki katika kuweka utaratibu wa mpango huu au wa mradi huu, kwa maana kwamba wao ndio waliosimamia kutunza mazingira yetu tulionayo, kwa maana ya kutumia sheria ndogo ambazo tulijiwekea kama bylaw.
Sheria wameweka wao wenyewe kwa kukusanya makundi na makabila, kwamba kwa sababu wamegawa hitaji la mwindaji na hitaji la mfugaji.
Wanaosimamia sasa katika kuhakikisha bylaw hizi zinatekelezwa tunao walinzi wetu wa jadi ambao tumewateua au ambao wameteuliwa na jamii yenyewe. Kwa hiyo wao ndio wanaosimamia kuhakikisha kwamba sheria hizi za usimamizi na ulinzi wa maliasili au maliasili tulionayo, wao ndio wanaolinda. Lakini pia sisi kama serikali tunakuwa karibu na wahusika hao wananchi kwa ujumla.
Vijana hao kimsingi tayari walishapatiwa mafunzo ya uaskari au kopasiasi. Kwa hiyo wana mavazi yao na wana vyeti, wanatambulika hata kwenye halmashauri yetu ya wilaya ya Mbulu. Kwa hiyo ni vijana ambao kimsingi wametokana na jamii husika.
VGS tunasimamia ulinzi au utunzaji wa mazingira haya kwa kutumia bylaws zilizotengenezwa na jamii wa kijiji cha Yaeda chini.
Haya ndio matumizi yetu yote sisi kiasilia iko kwenye rasilimali hifadhi. Ndio maana hata tunaikazia vikwazo hifadhi yetu pasikatwe au pasichomwe, kwa ajili kuna wanyama pia wako hapo abeni vyakula tunajisamini sisi kama Wahadzabe kula.
Jamii kama jamii kuwepo ndani ya mazingira hayo, kutunza mazingira hayo ni njia sahihi, kwa sababu wanayafahamu mazingira yao vizuri kabisa na wanayapenda na wanayathamini, kwa sababu ni mazingira ambayo yanawatunza pia. Na ndani ya mazingira hayo wanapata vitu vya asili, kwa mfano chakula chao cha asili kama matunda, mizizi, asali na wanyama pia. Hata jinsi wanavyokaa ndani ya haya mazingira sio waharibifu, hawakati miti, kwa sababu nyumba zao kwanza ni za asili, zinatumia miti midogo. Kwa hiyo badala ya kukata mti mzima, wanakata vitawi kwa ajili ya nyumba zao za asili. Na inategemea, kwa mfano kipindi cha masika ndo unakuta mara nyingi wanakaa ndani ya zile nyumba, lakini kiangazi kama hivi unakuta wanafagia tu chini ya mti mkubwa, labda wanaweka kauzio kidogo tu kuzuia upepo na baridi, wanaendelea kuishi.
Misitu yetu imekuwa ni tegemeo kubwa, ambapo moja kwa moja jamii za kwetu hizi zinapata pato la fedha kutokana na vipimo vinavyofanyika vya kugundua ni kiasi gani vya tani ambazo zimemezwa katika misitu yetu.
Carbon Tanzania is a forest protection project developer who collaborates with the Hadza and Datoga communities to protect the threatened forest. Through protecting threatened forests, the project generates high-quality carbon credits that are certified by Plan Vivo. These carbon credits are sold on the voluntary carbon market, providing the Hadza and Datoga with access to the international climate finance that support their forest protection activities.
Carbon, kwa makubaliano yetu au kwenye mkataba wetu, kwamba tumekubaliana kwamba wao kwa kuwa wanajua hewa ya ukaa inayopatikana hapa ni kiasi gani, na hao ndio wanao ratibu hilo, lakini pia kuchukua hiyo uratibu wa kupata ni tani ngapi za hewa ambazo wamezipata, wanaenda kuziuza. Wanapoenda kuziuza, basi ni moja kwa moja wao wanatuma fedha kwenye vijiji husika, na vijiji sasa ndio vinavyohusika katika masuala ya ugawaji wa fedha hizo.
Ni kweli sisi tuna mapato yetu kupitia Carbon Tanzania, na hii fedha imetokana na msitu wetu.
By protecting threatened forests from being cut down, the project is able to avoid the release of carbon that is stored in these trees. It is this carbon that is measured and quantified as a carbon credit. The carbon credits are sold on the voluntary carbon market to businesses with genuine net zero commitment.
Pesa tunakaa kwanza tunakuja kutangaziwa kwamba tumeingiziwa pesa katika akaunti yetu ni kiasi fulani. Baada ya kutangaziwa hivyo, tukijua ndio tunaitisha, ndio tunakaa sasa tunajadili sasa tuifanyeje. Tunagawa, tunaanza na wilaya tunaipa 10%. Tunakuja kata tunaipa 5%. Tunakuja kijiji tunaipa 10%. Zitakazobaki 10% ni za jamii. Katika hizo 10% ambayo tunazobakisha sisi pesa zetu, tunagawa kwa kuwalipa walinzi wetu wa jadi ambaye ni VGS. Alafu pia tunatoa asilimia kupeleka HIDOC. Alafu tunatoa asilimia pia ku elimu takazobaki sasa tunaweka katika mambo ya emergency.
Mimi kwa majina naitwa Paulo Isaya Simon. Nasoma katika shule ya sekondari ya Datini. Lakini kimakazi mimi nimezaliwa Domanga na mimi ni Mwazabe. Kwa hiyo inamaanisha tuliingia mkataba na kampuni ya Carbon. Hii kampuni inatupatia fedha. Yaani huu mkataba tunapata fedha ambapo jamii yetu sasa ikaamua kutumia hicho kipato cha kupata fedha kutoka kwenye kampuni ya Carbon kutusomesha sisi vijana.
Isingekuwa upande wa Carbon, kwa kweli wanafunzi wengi wasingepata elimu ya sekondari mpaka chuo kikuu. Kwa hiyo namna ya kumsomesha mwanafunzi ilikuwa ni ngumu sana kikwetu, kwa sababu huwezi kupata ndoo moja ya asali ukasomesha mwanafunzi, gharama ni kubwa mno.
Kipindi cha nyuma Wazabe walikuwa wasomi, lakini sasa hivi Wazabe wanasoma kwa wingi na wanaobahatika kusoma wanatoka kabisa, hamna Mwazabe anafeli. Moja wapo nikiwa mimi hapa nimesomeshwa na jamii kupitia hizo pesa za Carbon kuanzia sekondari mpaka chuo diploma, level diploma, na mpaka nimepata ajira kwenye Carbon. Kwa hiyo na enjoy hiyo kazi.
Sio swala la kifedha tu, unakuta msitu umetunzwa, umefikia kwenye umeboreka. Sasa imepelekea hata wenzetu hao wa Hadzabe kwa matumizi yao ya chakula cha asili ambacho kinapatikana msituni. Nje na jamii ya Kihadzabe pia kuna wenzetu ambao ni wafugaji. Katika swala zima la malisho ya mifugo, unakuta sasa katika swala la kuboreka kwa msitu, kwa sababu unalindwa na wale vijana ambao ni VGS. Kwa hiyo msitu huu unakuwa, kuna muda ambao tumekubaliana hautumiki ovyo ovyo, kuna muda tunaruhusu ukachungiwe mifugo.
Kuanzia Januari mpaka mwezi wa 7, hiyo hairuhusi mtu yeyote kuingia wapi? Kwenye hifadhi. Na baada ya pale sasa mwezi wa 7 sasa, kwa hiyo vitu vyote basi vitakuwa vimekomaa, yani hata kuna nini basi wanaruhusu sasa wale wafugaji na wanaingia.
Kama na hawa mwana wajibia abakana tamana kutindia wananyika. Mutka urida hagida banyika kai kigeni kana haga mwana gindia wanyika kiara beta bagiji tsdawa na mudindia na ile usnisini badara betani.
The Yaeda Eyasi Landscape Project grew from the award-winning Yaeda Valley Red Project that was developed by the Hadza. This new project is a collaboration between the Hadza and the Datoga communities.
Jamii hii ya Wadatoga kidogo wamepakana na hizi hifadhi, wengi wao jamii ya wafugaji wamepakana na hifadhi za taifa, mbuga za wanyama. Kwa hiyo wamekutana changamoto nyingi. Mwanzoni tulivyoelezea mradi ni kama waliona kama imekuja hifadhi nyingine ya kunyang'anywa ardhi, lakini baada ya kuwaelewesha wakawa wameelewa vizuri na kuona kabisa kwamba mradi huu ni wa manufaa kwao. Tulitumia muda kwa kweli. Sasa baada ya mradi kueleweka, ikawa sasa wameutaka, basi tukaingia kwenye mpango, wakauona ni mradi mzuri kwao, na baada ya matokeo kujionyesha kwamba mradi sasa umeanza kutupa faida.
Ana bangita de daga yesro kune na ngashe kaboy ha amana lige yenyi fisa kada waqaf ka ganda ngani da abawe daga sro kune na mbe madida ka amana le amado rukno da sro kune na aido da bare ga dai ga yanya sile pia na aido mi na da wakiji jana kana sindibe indishi abagada abase sagai taman dami mafkana na lapia ngia sifuga bara mchango amago sana ka kalbe mbe ka boy ni gifufu mchango bagada kana ro office kwa sana ka boy.
Fanya mimi nihamasike kuingia ni kutokana na uasili wangu, kwamba mimi ni mtunzaji wa mazingira na pia ni mzaliwa wa hapa. Kwa hiyo mimi nimekulia mazingira ya kuhamahama ndani ya misitu na pamoja na kula matunda, chakula na nini. Hivyo kilichonihamasisha zaidi ndio hiyo, kutokana na mila na desturi yangu.
Bacha kama na hali ya wangu la nafsi ya somo la kaigenda toka begi jili bangengi. Iya sih dia kayak fis kayak ganda tuh gigi dia bangen. Aski shongol la bagi dia bimi dari tatasa askaf kebasi tuh kayak geno ni. Iya bagi dia minta ditanya.
As many of our listeners know, the 27th Global Climate Conference just took place in Egypt. A few of our partners were there on the ground running interviews and hosting events. In this next segment, we'll hear some of the most compelling stories related to the nexus of climate and nature. Let's hear what they have to say.
Estamos en una carrera contra el tiempo para limitar el calentamiento global a 1.5 grados centígrados. Los gobiernos de todo el mundo se han comprometido a luchar contra el cambio climático. Sin embargo, por muy rápido que se descarbonicen las principales economías, será imposible alcanzar los objetivos del Acuerdo de París si no se toman medidas inmediatas, urgentes para detener y para revertir la pérdida de la naturaleza. Nos enfrentamos a nuestro mayor reto como especie y la naturaleza es el compañero más fuerte que podríamos desear. Nuestros bosques, nuestras praderas, nuestros suelos y nuestros océanos absorben el carbono de la atmósfera y al mismo tiempo ecosistemas como los manglares nos ayudan a adaptarnos a los impactos de la crisis climática. Sin embargo, estamos destruyendo la naturaleza mucho más rápido de lo que puede reponerse. Es vital que ampliemos las acciones para protegerla y para restaurarla. Esto significa reconocer el papel de la naturaleza para mantener en progreso la acción climática en la COP27 y aprovechar esta oportunidad para asegurar un ambicioso acuerdo global sobre biodiversidad en la COP15 de Montreal este diciembre. Uno que impulse la acción inmediata para revertir la pérdida de biodiversidad y conseguir un planeta positivo para la naturaleza en 2030. Nuestro mundo natural no es algo agradable de tener, es todo lo que tenemos. Sin él, no llegaremos a la meta, pero con él podemos tener éxito y sobrevivir y prosperar. La biodiversidad es fundamental para resolver la crisis climática. Es hora de levantar la bandera roja sobre la pérdida de la naturaleza. Debemos adoptar un sólido marco global de biodiversidad en la COP15. Es una oportunidad única en la década para crear un mundo con 0 emisiones netas, positivo para la naturaleza y mucho más equitativo.
You have an ear within the negotiations here, and last year, nature positive was a theme at the COP26. Is it on the agenda this year, and what are the impacts of the conversation around nature-based solutions?
Well, nature positive is definitely in the, let's say, in the whole COP setting, in the blue zone and the green zone and all the dialogues. There's a very, very rapidly and well-established recognition of the need to get nature carbon sinks right to have any chance of delivering on the Paris Agreement. How much it is in the negotiation space is still to be seen, because that's not on the agenda for this year. This COP meeting is the first COP meeting in Africa. It will be focusing on adaptation and loss and damage. What we're trying to communicate, which I hope that the negotiators will really bring in very, very seriously, is that the best way to handle adaptation and to avoid unmanageable loss and damage is to invest in nature. Nature is your resilience building capacity. If you want to have secure food provision, if you want to have local energy provision, if you want to have any chance of securing your freshwater supplies, you need to work with nature, not allow losses, not only of your carbon sinks, but of your whole, buffering capacity for heats and droughts and floods and extreme events. So I think we are, we'll see where this lands. I mean, hopefully there will be a positive outcome here at COP27. Crossing tipping points has 2 implications for humans. I mean, one is the short-term direct impacts, that they will strengthen even further climate extremes. So you'll get, worse droughts, floods, heat waves, disease patterns that are amplified even further. These are the kind of the direct impacts, which we're seeing examples of with extreme heat waves in Europe because of the changes in the Arctic is associated with changes in the tipping point system, even before it crosses this tipping point. But the second is that, cross a tipping point and sea level rise, even though the green ice sheet will take hundreds of years before it melts completely. Currently, we have a sea level rise projection of between 60 and 100 centimeters by the end of the century. But that's assuming that the Green Ice Sheet does not melt. But if the Green Ice Sheet crosses a tipping point and start accelerating melting even further, that level of sea level rise will, even on the short term, go faster. We might reach 1.5 meters of sea level rise over the next 80 years. That matters. That means a lot for the 100 million people affected in the Bangladesh coast, all the low-lying island states, all coastal zones on planet Earth will go from having problems today to having even worse conditions because the tipping point is crossed, which means that things get worse over a very long time, but also the pace of change accelerates.
Tuesday, the high-level champions with the Egyptian presidency announced the launch of the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, 30 specific solutions and what scale they need to get to by 2030. And I want to talk about one of them today to formally announce the mangroves breakthrough. The idea is that by agreeing where we need to get to, and by the way, I think the AFR 100 is kind of a prototype for that with the Momentum Evergreening Alliance towards 100 million hectares by 2030. The idea is by having that clear shared goal, we can all work together towards it, attract finance, and measure progress. And so the mangrove breakthrough is a collaboration between the Global Mangrove Alliance, which includes many of the partners here, and the high-level champions have worked to slot it into the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, and it commits to raising $4 billion to invest in the future of 15 million hectares of mangroves globally by 2030. That's about halting mangrove losses and restoring.
Carlos, 3 days left in negotiations. 3 days left on the negotiations if they don't go on over the weekend. How well has nature become integrated in these discussions?
Very much. First, let me say that for the first time, we are not negotiating in a climate COP. We are assessing progress in terms of implementing what we already negotiated a few years ago, which is the very famous, well-known Paris Agreement. So finally, we are in a implementation mood. And this is the most relevant, important thing in this COP, being able to really understand how do we implement our commitment to curb down emissions. This is the greatest opportunity to hear from countries on how do we find ways, cost-effective ways, by which we can, on one side, curb down emissions, but on the other side, do those very strategic investments to become much more resilient to the impact of climate change, because climate change is coming, it's coming strong, it's going to be here for the long run. The facts, the philanthropic community has been there before anybody else is doing the conservation effort. The NGOs, and some of the for-profit organizations that create philanthropic organizations that has been supporting nature conservation. It has been just in the last couple of decades that a stronger effort through public investments has been done, and the JEF has been there. So it's a nice complement. Now, everybody now connects the dots within nature and human well-being, nature and growth, nature and political stability. And this COP is a good example of how we're bringing together major stakeholders around a common goal.
Can you tell us a bit about why leading companies are investing in nature today, and whether these critics of tree planting have a valid point of view?
Sure. So I think I'll start off by saying that one of the main reasons companies are so keen on supporting these natural climate solutions is because they represent 30% of the mitigation opportunity that is necessary between today and 2030 in order to achieve a chance at achieving the Paris climate goals of keeping emissions and warming under 2.0. Nature and forests also represent livelihood opportunities for at least 25% of today's world population, and it's home to 80% of the biodiversity on the planet, not to mention all the medicinal and other amazing things that nature can do for us. And so this is why companies are really focused on figuring out how do we bring confidence into these investments, making sure that when I give you money, I am actually achieving a climate benefit that would not have been achieved otherwise.
Exactly, yeah. There's very complex language behind that sort of thing in the UNFCCC process. So well
Yes.
done for avoiding that. Yeah.
I try.
So, Patrima, I mean, when were you founded? Where are you based, and
Sure.
where are you operating in?
Yeah, okay, great. So Pachamama, we are founded by two Argentinian founders. They're technology entrepreneurs. And Diego, he comes from an indigenous background in Argentina, and he really is driven by he grew up watching the Argentinian forests, and beautiful as they were, traveled around the world, came back and realized that half of what he called home was gone. And so he came back and wanted to really harness all of the things that he learned as a tech entrepreneur and figure out how do we bring more investments in stopping deforestation and support restoration. And so that's really how we were founded. But we're a true tech company. We're fully dispersed. We don't have a physical office space. I'm personally in Los Angeles.
We welcomed the report. I'm sadly, I'm not astonished by the findings, but I am extremely disappointed because when it came down to it, Nestle was one of only a handful, I think 9 companies that had made serious progress on addressing deforestation. And many companies had made a commitment as long as 10 years ago, as we did, in fact. Now, we've made huge progress on deforestation. We started 10 years ago. We've made the focus on 5 key commodities where the risk is at its greatest. What we found, interestingly, instead of getting to the 100% by 2020, which was what we originally committed to, one of the things we found that was interesting was that the last bit to close the gap really was where we were sourcing where there were a lot of smallholders. And we need to put people at the center of this whole debate. So we slowed it down just a little bit to make sure that we weren't disadvantaging people in our value chain, smallholders in our value chain. So that's got us to a point now where we're very, very close to 100% now on those 5 key commodities. And we know, since we made that commitment, we also know that forests are absolutely essential to us achieving our net zero targets. We're not going to get there unless not only are we ending deforestation, but also we're doing something positive about forests and restoring degraded.
In fact, about 90% of world's corals are completely under threat. I've seen corals myself. I've had conversations with people who have seen corals that are completely bleached white, dead. I think people sometimes see corals as something like a visual, like something that's really beautiful to just look at. But they are alive. They are huge ecosystems, and their health is an indicator of how healthy the ocean is in general, overall. So without corals, we're kind of screwed. So we depend on oceans for our own health. They soak up so much carbon. They create half of all the oxygen we breathe. And so they are under threat, and it's crucial that we now do everything in our power to save them. Nature is so incredibly resilient and brilliant. When we leave it to do its own thing, we don't get involved. And these corals are the perfect example of that. They're just so incredibly beautiful. And my first thought was like, how can anyone see these for themselves and not want to save them? It's just the idea that my kid, my son, and everyone's kids are going to grow up, learning about corals and books, but never being able to see them for themselves. That is one of the saddest things in the world. And not just that, but they provide these really important ecosystems. They are one of the most important things for the entire biosphere.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining National Geographic and Campaign for Nature here in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. How's everyone doing? It's been a long COP. Looks like some tired faces, but still some energy left. All right. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And we are excited to be here on Solutions Day because we want to talk about a solution that works both in COP27 and importantly coming up in COP15. My name is Brian O'Donnell. I'm the director of Campaign for Nature. Today we're here to talk in Sharm el-Sheikh obviously about the climate crisis, but an overlooked portion of the climate crisis is the role that nature plays. We know that nature can provide more than a third of the solution to the climate crisis. We also know that we have a similar crisis facing biodiversity. Both of these crises are important to all life on Earth. And together, if we solve these in a joint way, we can ensure a viable future for people and for the nature that we all love. In a few weeks, another COP will start in Montreal, COP 15. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address the biodiversity crisis. In that COP will be a target to protect and conserve at least 30% of the world's lands and oceans, and do so in a way that respects and empowers the rights of indigenous peoples and their leadership in conservation. We know that that is a key component to addressing both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And we're going to have an exciting panel here with leaders from around the world who will talk about the 30 by 30 movement, the rights of indigenous people in that movement, and how we can both help solve the climate crisis and help solve the biodiversity crisis by protecting our lands and our oceans and making sure we listen to and center the voices of indigenous peoples and local communities. So with that, I want to first welcome some incredible panelists. We have two ministers here, which is a real treat for us, and we recognize how busy you are in these negotiations, and we want to respect your time. I first want to invite with the minister from Samoa, Honorable Minister Schuster, who is here to make an announcement about the commitment of the people of Samoa and the leadership of the people of Samoa for the conservation of oceans and land.
Thank you, Brent. I know it's we in the Pacific, we've developed a Blue Pacific continent strategy, of which all the Pacific Island nations have committed to supporting the issue of conservation, of marine conservation. And as for Samoa, we have developed our Samoa Ocean Strategy, which we've committed to 30% of our forest, of our marine resources. Within our biodiversity strategy, we've also identified the need to increase our protection of our terrestrial living. So this campaign is very important for us. And we're also working with other small island states as part of our Small Island SIDS Alliance that we will also launch together at the next COP. But in terms of why, I think the faces I see here, you're all committed to, and you all understand the importance of biodiversity. For us as small island nations, we have limited resources. Our limited biodiversity, if we don't look after it, not only the next is the impact of climate change is going to affect us because of others, but at least within the biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity, we have our role to play by protecting and looking at ways to improve and sustainably manage our terrestrial biodiversity. I don't know if that's good enough for it, but we're glad to join this alliance. We look forward to working with our brothers in the Pacific to continue to join, and as well as the Alliance of Small Island States, because as we continue to talk at this COP, we're at the forefront. We're bearing the brunt of climate change, and we need to stand and look at every opportunity that will ensure us that we have other constituents that will stand with us to help in our goal of 1.5 degrees. And this is one of the ways that we totally support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Schuster. I was told that some folks in the back couldn't hear. How is it now? Can you hear us okay or no? Little bit, still need a little louder. Okay. Well, we are grateful for the leadership of Samoa, and they just announced, for those of you who didn't hear, that they will be joining the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, which is an alliance of now more than 112 countries that have endorsed the global target to protect and conserve at least 30% of the world's lands and oceans. And as we said in the beginning, there's no pathway to reach the 1.5 degree climate goal if we don't protect, conserve nature. So this is an exciting announcement, and we're grateful to have you here. I'd like to welcome our panelists up to the seats now. We're going to have a discussion and some Q&A. The first panelist that I would like to welcome is the Honorable Collins Nzovu, who is the Minister of Green Economy and Environment. He's been in that position since September of 2021. Please come on up, Minister. And I'd like to welcome KM Rays, who is a National Geographic explorer, a community organizer, and conservationist, who she also has a fan club here, I see, from the Philippines. Also, Kaluko Paul Matuku, who is a Kenyan climate activist and environmentalist, who's working to improve youth participation in the environment. And Dr. Solange Mandiaki Baji, who is the president of Rights Resources Initiative and a close partner with Campaign for Nature. We work regularly every week, so good to see you here, Solange. Yes, you can. So we're going to start with some remarks from the panelists, and afterwards I'm going to be asking a few questions from the panelists. Oh, yes, Curlin. I didn't. Sorry. We also have one more panelist here. I did not realize he had made it to the room. So we have Curlin, who is the director of the Okavango Wilderness Project. So thank you for joining us as well. So we're going to start with the minister, who is also a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. So we're proud to see the leadership of Zambia. And we can start with your introductory remarks.
Hello. Is it good afternoon or is it good morning? Indeed, we consider this subject very, very, very important. For us, indeed, we joined the High Ambition Coalition, the 30 by 30, with open hands, and we want to ensure that it succeeds. Coming into COP27, we're very, very clear what our results should be. One of the major results, obviously, is to push the developed world to increase their ambition on mitigation. We believe that a push on ambition resulting in low CO2 emissions is good for biodiversity protection. It's a clear link. Where I come from, we are very, very clear about how we want to ensure that we green our economy, and the resultant effects or results coming from ensuring that the economy is green is because we believe that without nature protection, the very survival of us is doomed. I come from an area where people depend on nature. The very livelihoods of our people are dependent on the natural resources God has given us. Losing these as a result of the climate crisis, as a result of our partners not increasing our ambition, as a result of low adaptation funding, as a result of really protecting them, would be disastrous. As Zambia, we look forward to a successful COP15. We need to ensure that there are red lines, clear red lines to which every country must be held to. We need to measure progress. I want to urge everybody of you to speak and speak more with louder voices. As we go on, we'll be able to contribute more, but we believe that protecting nature is protecting ourselves. And we need to sing this song more and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. A quick question to follow up for you. Your ministry is new. The title is new on the world. We don't see many ministries that combine green development with conservation, and it's an exciting prospect. Can you tell us a little bit about how nature plays in the role of the development of Zambia and how the conservation of nature can fit into the future of your country?
Thank you. I think that's a very, very important question. For us, coming into government, we were very, very clear how we wanted to develop our economy. We depend on minerals, we depend on tourism, the animals, we depend on water resources. We also are aware that we need to join the energy transition. This is a pathway we set for ourselves, creating this ministry. It's called the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. So a green economy meaning low carbon, meaning resource efficiency, meaning social inclusivity, the very people we are leading, bringing them out of abject poverty, meaning the other pillar is on environmental sustainability. We are worried in there to ensuring that our biodiversity is not lost. We come from a region where the biodiversity is very, very rich, but because of climate change, we are losing it. Now, how do we, on one side, protect our environment, protect our biodiversity, and on the other side, develop our economy? So this is an equation we are trying to resolve in the ministry. And we're very, very clear what our red lines are. How do we, from the mining sector, for example, how do we ensure that we reduce pollution? We've come up with the necessary legislation as well, the necessary institutional framework. So we're not just talking, we are making the laws to speaking to ensuring that biodiversity is not lost. For areas where there's a huge loss, we're trying to see how it's restored so that it's a two-way thing, restoration and prevention. But we prefer more to prevent biodiversity loss. And we need to speak more loudly on this matter. It's very, very important. We believe that this is a matter which, when taken care of very well, the survival of humankind will be guaranteed. So it shouldn't be secondary. It should be actually at the top of our agenda. In any case, we depend on nature for our survival, for our everyday lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Nzovo. And I want to recognize that both Minister Nzovo and Minister Schuster are incredibly busy and also negotiating the agreement here in Sharm el Sheikh. So we welcome you to stay as long as you can, but understand if you have to leave at any time.
Thank you, and the audience, you forgive us. We may have to leave early because we are going to another meeting. But just to assure yourselves that we are with you and that your aspirations and our aspirations. I personally, to tell you that I've been lobbying other ministers to speak to this. Even as we negotiate, I'm leading the African group of negotiators. Issues of biodiversity loss are on the table. The connection is very, very clear. So you have partners in Africa, you have partners in Asia, you have partners everywhere, but we will remain a strong voice for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is one of the most hopeful announcements I've heard all week, and we are really grateful for your leadership and wish you good luck in the negotiations. I'm going to turn it over to Kerlin Costa, who is a National Geographic explorer who leads the Okavango Wilderness Project. And you're in one of the most biodiverse regions of the world, one of the last major big intact freshwater systems on the planet. Can you tell us how protecting nature is critical to the economies worldwide? And can you talk more about the specific impacts of the Okavango Delta and how the success there could be achieved elsewhere in the world?
Thank you for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. Like the Honorable Minister said, we depend on natural resources, and there's no way we can talk about conservation development without evaluating our own economical system. We depend on an economical system that is extracting in a very unsustainable way these resources. So I think the point is we need to evaluate what is necessity, what is that we need to exist in order to talk about conservation. Because we can dialogue a lot about conservation, but if you keep existing in the same economical system, it's definitely not sustainable. And then in terms of the economy around the Okavango Delta, you can see that the delta in Botswana, although the major hydrographic basin is actually in Angola and all the water is coming from Angola, the delta in Botswana is an example of how an economy can be built around the environment. That said, there are a lot of mistakes done in the Okavango Delta, but it's an example. And I think we can look at that example and actually pick on the errors, on the mistakes, because, for example, in conservation, we're not including humans in this topic. We seem to separate humans and environment, and that's a big mistake because, well, at least for the communities that live in this environment, they live there, they depend on those resources, and they depend on those resources directly. So if you're not looking at their lifestyles, their culture, their values, which is what has allowed these environments to be pristine up until today, we're not going to be able to talk about conservation. So I think in terms of an economy based in natural resources and in this case in tourism, I think it needs to be reevaluated to actually learn why or what have these communities been doing that has allowed this environment to be pristine. And when we develop such economy, they need to be included. Their ways need to be respected, and their vision for the future need to be also taken into account.
Thank you so much, Curlin. One, I'm going to catch him off guard with a question that we didn't prep for, but I want to ask you. You've been to one of this place, which is a magical place. I haven't had the luxury and the experience to go there sometime. Tell us a little about it. Why is it such a magical place for you? Why do you love it?
So as much as the world knows the Delta is not the most special place. The special place is in Angola, where all the water that goes into the Delta is born. So we have this part in southern eastern Angola that for the past 40 to 50 years has been closed because of the civil war. So it is actually super pristine. It's one of the last few remote pristine wildernesses in the world. And we're talking about hundreds of pristine rivers. The second biggest subtropical forest in the world. The second biggest pit soil system in the world. So it's like a capsule lost in time. And I think as an Angolan, it's a great opportunity to actually learn from these mistakes around us to create something that not only protects, but allows us to develop in an exemplary way.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn it over to KM Rave. KM is a National Geographic explorer, and she's a community organizer who has worked to protect and conserve the areas of her favorite parts of the Philippines. She is going to talk a little bit about how she has worked with local communities, the lessons she has learned, and why working with communities is so important to achieve conservation.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm KM from the Philippines. Hi in the background. But before I start, I'd really like to acknowledge place. Egypt, from the pyramids to the Red Sea, is a country of unparalleled historical importance and spectacular natural wonder. But not now or ever will we overcome our dual climate and biodiversity crises without human rights. I stand with British Egyptian Alaa Abdel Fattah, Mohammed Oxygen Ibrahim, Hoda Abdel Monaim, Hisham Fuad, Ziad El Alaimi, and all political prisoners here and across the global south who fight so I may have the freedom to be on this panel today. I also feel like this COP27, many of us have sat here in the nature zone and across pavilions and events discussing what's needed. And actually, we all already know. It boils down ultimately to recognizing IPLC rights and giving groups like mine the funding to do it. The only thing I can ask specifically that I haven't really heard and actually sounds really mundane is around these IPLC pledges that are going around. If you're a donor, any donors here in the room, you're scot-free today. But if you know of any donors, I ask that if you pledge to fund directly to IPLCs, then publish it on your website. Because none of us on the ground know how to get this funding that apparently is being thrown around at huge amounts. And then connected to this is possibly also trying to connect all of these grants in one centralized hub. So for those of you who have the power, I know we have the Path to Scale group, please connect. It would be great if all of the IPLCs around the world could actually find these grants. And if it has to be through an INGO, then great, but please just let us know so we know how to get it. But besides this, I don't think I can add any more than what's already been said. So instead, I actually want to capitalize on this opportunity to talk a little bit about my story at the Center for Sustainability PH, which really is a story about possibility for frontline communities. I also want to share this story because I feel that Southeast Asia, at global conferences and especially at the climate COPs, is very little represented. And so I wanted to kind of share a little bit about my corner of the world today. So bear with me. I'm going to try and zip through it really quickly, Brian. So I'm coming from Palawan, a far-flung island closer to Borneo than mainland Philippines. We are karst mountains and dense, pristine rainforests, alive with birdsong, before dramatically dropping down to pearly white sand beaches over turquoise waters and teeming coral reefs. We're a World Biosphere Reserve, home to 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We are made up of 8 distinct groups of indigenous peoples, still retaining culture and tradition on ancestral lands and waters. Palawan alone is home to 232 endemic species. Once upon a time, my country was 90 to 95% covered in pristine rainforests. Now only 3% of that rainforest is left. And yet the Philippines is still one of only 17 mega biodiverse countries, and the majority of this natural wealth is found on my island, Palawan. But our island is now increasingly under threat from mining companies for electric car minerals and rich oil reserves, and deforestation for modern development and unsustainable tourism. It's also the 3rd most dangerous country globally for land defenders like myself, after Colombia and Mexico. So with 5 of my colleagues, we decided a few years ago to found the Center for Sustainability PH. We're from the tribes of the Cuyunan and Tagbanwa. And we established this organization to protect the last remaining 3% of pristine rainforest through legal establishment of protected areas. And we started in the place where I believe all change makers should, our backyard. And it's a place actually called Cleopatra's Needle, so called for the highest obelisk peak of this sprawling and lush rainforest with rivers, streams, and creeks coursing down the rolling mountains like veins. Over 4 years, we mobilized our communities, riding off-road, hiking through rivers. I drowned my motorcycle quite a few times. I was very cocky, and I've now learned my lesson. We secured the FPIC, the free and prior informed consent, from our communities. We also learned some tough lessons. We didn't do FPIC the right way in some communities, and we got kicked out. We were told that we didn't listen properly, and so that was a big lesson for us. We also facilitated scientific research, and very importantly, we lobbied to our politicians. And after 4 years of hustle, bravado, and fake it till we make it, we got the piece of paper, and we got a law recognizing Cleopatra's Needle as a critical habitat under the Philippine Wildlife Act. It's now over 41,000 hectares of protected area. It's 2.5 times the size of Sharm el-Sheikh. It's home to 31 IUCN globally threatened species, 61 Palawan endemic species, and is the ancestral domain of the disappearing Batak tribe. Many of you won't know this tribe. There's only 200 members left on the entire planet, and they reside in this forest. It's also home to the #1 poached animal globally, the pangolin. And so we did it. So I share this as a story of possibility for 2 reasons. Number 1, all of this we did with $170,000. That's it, over 4 years. And this is the same as 5 delegates staying at the Four Seasons Hotel for COP27. It's that affordable. And secondly, I tell this story because at the time we were 6 youth. Our youngest member was 17 years old, and between all of us, we had 3 university degrees. So I say this because we talk a lot about IPLCs and the lack of capacity, and that we're not sure about the mechanisms to fund them. We don't need all of these Western degrees to do it. Just give us a chance, and honestly, just give us the money. We really don't need that much. We don't need 1.75 billion or whatever the last pledge was. We really need a lot less than that. And so, yeah, this is my story, and this is why I think it's so important to support IPLCs.
Thank you, Cam. That was inspiring. We all have a debt of gratitude for your work, the sacrifice you made, and of course for the people in those communities who put their lives on the line every day to make this possible. I'm now going to turn to Kaluki Paul Matuku. Kaluki is a Kenyan climate activist and environmentalist working to improve youth participation and decision-making around climate justice. He's a regional director for Africa for Youth for Nature, and he has been an inspiration for how we engage youth and engage community in conservation. So I wanted to ask you specifically about that. How, in your experiences, have you seen youth become a global force and a local force for change and for conservation?
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. I'm not sure I can match up to your energy, but I see she's pretty much youth and working on restoration. I believe we can never deny the youth a chance again to believe in them and to lead on restoration for three key reasons. Number one, we comprise a huge proportion of the world's population, right? And I think this is an opportunity for us to see how we can engage young people who has the energy, the innovation, and the time to actually fail forward to create solutions for the against the climate crisis and the biodiversity loss. But they're also the same people who are every time organizing and creating solidarity to exactly work with their peers, to work with other like components of the society for intergenerational engagements around restoration. I also think young people are, for lack of a better word, the most affordable to work with. That we are not so expensive, like she said, right? We don't need $1 million investments to actually carry on restoration projects on the ground. We at times just need the will from our leaders. We just need the welcoming from NGOs, and we just need the involvement to be able to contribute our ideas and bring our solutions to the table. And the last thing is, I believe young people are fashionable in nature. We just need to make ecosystem restoration sexy for youth. We need to make it very enticing for them to actually see a value for it. And just drawing back to the 30 by 30 ambition, I think for me, it's a good initiative, but the question is it the end? No, it is just the bare minimum. If we must protect the world's land and seascapes, then we must see 30 by 30 is just the beginning point to what we should have done years ago. But we need to increase the ambition. We need to work with not just young people. We need to work with local farmers. We need to work with women. We need to work with IPLCs, because all these are the custodians who we have a chance to actually ensure and secure our future. And I end by saying, nature never needs us, but we need nature. So by protecting nature, we are actually safeguarding ourselves. Thank you.
Kaluki, I want to ask you one more question. You are also a climate activist, and you talked a lot about nature. Tell us how you work day in, day in on climate, and then you work day in, day in on nature. How are these issues related? Are you seeing the synergies that we need to solve these problems, or are people still too isolated when they think about these things?
Interesting question. I don't think there is any crisis that is a crisis on its own. They are all very closely linked to each other, that we cannot afford to separate them. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis, they are all linked together. And so as a climate activist, I'm not just in the streets shouting and throwing stones and whatever people think about, but we are actually working with communities to iterate programs that will actually deliver more conservation education, programs that will actually help communities understand the value of the trees that they have, the biodiversity around them, and therefore being able to connect between, food systems, biodiversity loss, and how our simple act of restoring nature, ensuring the small microbial biodiversity in the soil is protected, and ensuring that farmers actually utilize organic ways of crop growing, then that makes them see the value of conservation, the value of addressing biodiversity loss, and the value of also doing restoration programs to solve the climate crisis. So my day-to-day engagements are around creating awareness, but also doing the work on the ground to showcase that nature and biodiversity and also climate crisis are not all separate. They are the same crisis. In Kenya, we are seeing it, and we are doing our ambitions towards 10% forest cover by 2030. Now I understand we're almost there in 2022. But also in Africa, how do we then work with you to exactly explore opportunities around the local areas? For instance, on tree growing, on tree nursery establishment, on tea fertilizer production, and then creating new livelihoods for themselves. So yes, all these are interconnected, and you can never, ever separate them.
Thank you so much. We'll now hear from Dr. Solange Bandiaki-Baji. She is the president of Rights and Resources Group, and previously led their Africa program. She has been a powerful advocate for the voices of indigenous peoples and local communities, but also for the voices of women and girls in rights, in climate, and in nature conservation. So I want to introduce Solange, who's a friend of mine and get to work with regularly. We have weekly calls. I want to ask you about conservation and the way that conservation is approached and why a rights-based approach to conservation is critical, both in the biodiversity space and the COP coming up in Montreal in a few weeks, but also in work to preserve forests in the climate space.
Thank you very much, Brian, and hello to everyone. First, I would like to thank Campaign for Nature for allowing me to be part of this inspiring panel, and really youth and people doing work on the ground. It's very inspiring. Thank you also for allowing me to be part of this, because I'm feeling young today, being part of this conversation. And I think most of the things have been said, and what the three panelists already said is really music to my ears. First, I would like to say the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are two sides of one coin. We cannot talk about one without really thinking about the other one. So coming up with solutions, really, we need to look into these two crises together. So that's one thing. And I think my brother from Africa already mentioned that. But also when we talk about nature-based solutions, we need to think about peoples-based solutions, because without the people in it, we cannot really talk about nature-based solutions. And here, when I talk about people, I refer to indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant people, but also men, women, and youth within those communities. Because generally, when we talk about community, we think about it as a very homogeneous, but we need to really unpack and recognize the work that youth and women are really doing in terms of biodiversity conservation, but also climate change mitigation and adaptation. And what I can say really about conservation is that we cannot keep on doing conservation like from a colonial approach or post-colonial approach, meaning that referring only to national parks or protected areas created by government. The reason why we cannot do forest conservation is that right now, community-based conservation is the solution. If we recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, research have shown that in areas where the rights of indigenous peoples and local community are recognized, we have high biodiversity conservation. We also have high carbon storage. So it's very important to really think about community-based or right-based conservation, because that's really the key at this point. And for that, when we talk about climate change policies, conservation policies, we need to see how these communities can be part of the decision-making processes and not just come with top-down approaches, because that will not really take into account their own solutions. We need to also appreciate their historical contribution, because indigenous peoples, for example, have been managing or preserving biodiversity for millennia. This is not new. And when we talk about nature-based solution, we talk about it as if this is something really new and we need to support them. Like my sister was saying, let's give them the money because they are the one who have been doing it. Let's just support those initiatives. They have the capacity. And I think we need maybe to build the capacity of the donors to really understand what's really going on the ground. And that way they will really see that the solutions already exist. It's just more about trust and also putting the money in front of the right people. And I think that's what I can say just to start this conversation. But again, this is very inspiring.
You mentioned money, and I think that's important. We've seen studies, and Rights Resources has come up and helped partner on some of the studies that show that very little climate and very little biodiversity money makes it to communities. You've also been a leader in helping to rectify that situation. Tell us a little bit about what needs to happen from a structural standpoint to get that money to the ground and what you're working on that.
For Earth at the Rights and Resources Initiative, which is a global coalition of right holders organization, more than 150 from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, really promoting the legal recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant, and youth and women within those communities. What we realize is that if you look at the funding, only 1% of the climate funding has been going to supporting indigenous peoples and local community, only 1%. So that's a fundamental challenge that we need to really look into. And as my sister was saying, the 1.7 billion pledge that was made in Glasgow, they released a report last week here at COP, which showed that only 17% of that 1.7 billion has reached to indigenous peoples and local communities. So for us at the Rights and Resources Initiative, what we are saying, we need to come up with new mechanism, funding mechanism that will make sure that the funds goes directly to the people on the ground. And we've created in collaboration, partnership with Campaign for Nature, the Community Land Rights Conservation Finance Initiative, also known as Clarify. So Clarify is a global funding mechanism that aims to collect public and private funding and re-grant to indigenous peoples and local communities. And like I said, the RRI coalition is mainly composed of right holders. So we want to make sure that the funding that we can collect goes directly to supporting those local organizations on the ground. In addition to Clarify also, I think you have been hearing there are many indigenous people-led like funding mechanisms that have been created. In Indonesia, for example, AMAN, which is one of the largest indigenous networks, they have created their own funding mechanism. If you go to Central America, the Mesoamerican Alliance, they created the Mesoamerican Fund. In Brazil, we have the Podali Fund to really work with indigenous people in the rainforest. So right now, we are seeing a movement of funding mechanism created and led by indigenous peoples and local communities. And I think the donors should really make sure that funding goes to supporting those indigenous-led organizations. Another challenge is that most of the funding that donors are giving around climate either goes to government or to multilateral organizations. But also experience have shown that it has not been really trickling down to the local level. So with Clarify and all these funding mechanisms, and as my sister was saying, even without this funding mechanism, these organizations on the ground, they have been doing work for more than decades. How can we make sure that the funding goes directly to supporting them? But also the funding has to be fit for purpose, meaning that we cannot treat these local organizations, indigenous organizations as Western NGOs. You cannot have the same requirement. And funding, for example, has to be flexible. It has to be long-term. We cannot just come and say, oh, in 1 year you have to deliver. Let them decide how long it will take for them to deliver. It has to be gender inclusive because most of the time, the funding going down is not really reaching women's organization or indigenous women's organization. How do you make sure that those women's organizations have access to direct funding? So there's a lot more that we can say really about this funding, but I think we are at a moment, or a critical moment, where if we really want to tackle the two crises, the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, we need to make sure that funding goes directly to supporting indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant youth, and women within those communities.
Thank you, Solange. We're going to have a few moments for audience questions, but before we get to that, I just want to see if any of our panelists would like to reflect on any things that other panelists raised or have additional remarks they want to make before we go to questions.
I actually would like to add on both your statements and, like you say, our African brother statement. I think we should reevaluate. We are saying educate the communities or teach them things, and the fact that they don't know, they actually know a lot more about their environment than we do. They are the best people to tell you what tree is this, what's the connection between this tree and this bacteria. We are the ones coming in with a different approach, assuming things on our own external perspective. So I don't think they need educating because they've been doing conservation, like you say, for millennia. We are the ones that need educating. So perhaps instead of imposing systems of conservation into these local communities, it's actually us in towns, in major towns, that actually need to reevaluate our ways of being and understand the impact that our resource consumption has, instead of forcing others to be limited. They have a saying that it's like making us comfortable in our own poverty. So we want them to live in a certain lifestyle, but we are living in a different lifestyle. So I think it's reevaluation of ourselves instead of introducing and imposing systems into these local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. May I also just add that I keep saying that we need to move from an egocentric economic model to an ecocentric economic model. And I say this noting that yesterday I saw a report being published about, the world pushing more for restoration. And the idea is governments and leaders are only factoring in the carbon sequestration aspect of trees. But to me, I believe restoration is much more than that, just the carbon capture and carbon storage that we are pushing for. We have to think about biodiversity. We have to center exactly what my fellow panelists have said, like the rights of communities, the right to food, the right to ecosystem integrity across the sectors. Then how do we ensure that while we are pushing for 30 by 30, we are not just doing it from a very unilateral approach, but more in a very diverse complexity, and ensuring that exactly we rethink how we are financing groups. This bit of top-down approach, I think it's not working, and we need to be honest with ourselves. How do we trust young people? How do we trust farmers? How do we trust indigenous communities enough to support with finances to be able to scale up the initiatives, which, by the way, they've been doing over the years? How do we stay true to ourselves to ensure that by pushing for 30 by 30, we are not merely just talking about the already conserved territories by indigenous communities, but actually that our governments and our NGOs are pushing forward to establish new grounds and really collaborate with already existing frameworks from IPLCs and other groups to further drive ambition, further drive our restoration. And I believe if we can do that, it will be doing service to humanity, we'll be doing service to nature, and for sure, we can overcome the two crises.
Sorry, one last thing. I just wanted to add that what you were saying, Dr. Solange, about the timelines, I was really like, yes, because something that I think I'm going to the wrong panels these last 2 weeks because I haven't heard anyone talk about the importance of following community timelines. It's been like the target is 2030, the target is 2025. There's no recognition of like, for these targets to be met, we need to go down to the timelines that are at the community level. So I just want to thank you for highlighting that because, as I said, I haven't heard that once in the last 2 weeks.
Okay, we're going to take some audience questions here, and please direct your questions to either one of the panelists or the panelists as a whole. Remember, we have Kaluki, KM, Kerlin, and Solange here. Anyone have a question that they'd like to ask the panelists? Yes.
Hi, thanks everyone for all your insights. I think as someone from Southeast Asia, you can see that the representation at COP is dismal and also very important. And I wanted to direct this question to KM to see, as we close off COP27 and in the lead up to COP15, what are the key things that Southeast Asian nations, those on the ground, are really calling for? And how can everyone else support those calls?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So representation is something that's really important for our region. We're constantly getting left behind. And a classic example is just the time zones. We're never on the right meeting times. And I think that's really curtailed our participation in a lot of things. I do hope for especially our heads of state that we do step up. I think that we have, for those of you who are in Southeast Asia or in those areas, we have a campaign 30 by 30, 30x30sea.org. We also have an Instagram page. I want to see lots of follows after this. But this is all about trying to get our leaders to actually listen to us and turn up. Because I think what happens also is, in my experience anyway, because we are so far away and geographically and time zone wise, we can get left behind. Often we kind of go, okay, well, no one's looking at us anyway, and so we don't have to turn up. And so I think that it's really important for all of us that are connected to East and Southeast Asian countries and networks to really urge our participation, because I think that also nobody ever calls out that we're never at these events. And so I think that it's really important for us to remember that please don't leave APAC behind. And if you know people in the APAC region, also encourage them to be a part of these events, and that what we do actually matters. We punch way above our weight in Southeast Asia. We make up 3% of global landmass, but account for over 20% of global biodiversity. So there's no way we're getting to 30 by 30 if what we're protecting are the important bits without Southeast Asia.
Wow, thank you so much. My name is Teresa Mudhoni from Kenya. I do appreciate you are the best. Like, this is my last event as I leave home, but I'll go a very happy person because I have heard the voices from the crowd. I want to say, I have heard KM say, like, you are very far. You are far from what? We need to go to the COPs in Asia also. Like, we should not leave other areas just because it's far from what? Like, we need to make sure like everybody is involved where you are. We are all in this earth together and we have to work together. Nobody should be told that you are very far. We are all together, and if we lose this world, if we lose earth, this is our life support system. So we have to work together. So it's not a question, but to appreciate you and to tell you, I'm so happy. I go a happy person.
Other questions from the audience? Okay, then I'm going to ask our panelists to add some concluding remarks. We've heard about the need to integrate climate and nature, that these issues are two sides of the same coin, as Solange said. We've heard about the need to make sure that youth are engaged, that indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendants are listened to and centered, and their approaches to conservation are involved in this. We've heard about the need for a large global vision, but local implementation at a time scale that is appropriate for local communities. And we've heard a little bit about the why. Why are we all in this work? What is inspiring us about these places, about these communities for what we're trying to do? So I want to offer the panelists any chance to speak of some final words. What would you tell the people who are finalizing the negotiations here in the Climate COP? What do they need to know about going to Montreal for the Biodiversity COP? And what words of advice would you offer them as some concluding remarks? We can start for the right and go left.
Thank you. You know what? We all can do it. That's what I believe. I'm youth, and I'm seeing first a shout out to the Africa Youth Caravan, to COP27 delegation that is here. We brought about over 21 youth to actually, exactly from what you say, to be part of this negotiation and actually meet our leaders and other compatriots to hear one another, share our solutions, and actually see what we can take back home. With that said, I think the global biodiversity framework is very much needed, and it's needed for nature, for people, and for livelihoods. We cannot afford to keep negotiating without action on the ground. And I think this is what our world leaders, our negotiators need to know. The crises are not waiting for us. We have to style up. We have to deliver the financing, and we have to know that, again, like I said, it's not so expensive to fund youth. It's not so expensive to fund farmers. It's not so expensive to fund women and indigenous groups. We just need to trust us and allow us to operate along our own timelines. Do not impose ideas on us. Listen to us, and let's see how we can create solutions moving forward. And then I'll conclude by saying that a few projects actually happening in Africa. I want to mention Duape, that I've somehow gotten to know, and it's on how youth are actually using nature-based solutions and combining that with technology to drive action on the ground and create livelihoods for themselves. And for me, I believe if youth are doing this, surely all leaders need to look the other way and see how they can support. There's an upcoming project in Kenya as a pilot in Uka, again, utilizing the power of nature-based solutions to create ecopreneurship opportunities and livelihoods for youth across our Africa. So if we can do this, I think 30 by 30 and other big campaigns can actually come to be because you're trusting young people. We are giving them the finances that we need. And already young people are fundraising for this. So if we can do this, I believe other compatriots, partners, and countries can really come and support us to actually implement our global goals for that 2030, but also beyond that, because I think these timelines have to also match with action, and we have to really see the other way and really bring the funds closer to youth and some of these groups that need to do the work on the ground. Thank you.
I have two asks. One, I don't know if you know, but currently our heads of state are not going to be at the Biodiversity COP in December. Please tweet to them. They need to come and tweet your environmental ministers to also put pressure on the heads of state. That's my first ask. And my second ask is for those of us who've been involved in the negotiations, there's a lot of room for improvement for the facilitating of the negotiations. We really risk losing credibility of the Biodiversity COP if we do not finalize an agreement at the end of this year. So for all of us that are involved, I hope that you can tweet the right people and really urge our heads of state and for our country delegations to bring our best negotiators and our best diplomats to close the deal. Thank you.
I think what I have to say is very simple. And I don't like to incline the conversation towards my African origins, but and I'm sure in other parts of the world you have the same. So basically in Africa, we have a history of oral tradition. And a lot of comments, a lot of research say, well, things need to be written to be remembered. But there might be a reason for our ancestors to have it made oral tradition, because you can write a lot of things and things will be put into a corner. But if you have an elder around the fire speaking to the young people, they will listen. And I think that's something that we're not doing. We're not listening to each other. There's this in Angola, because of being secluded because of the war, we still have a lot of traditional systems of management of land and culture. And there's a term that they use, it's called Ngala Okola. Translated, it's something like sacred power. And they say, living without friendship is to die without a grave. And if you substitute friendship for partnership or for connection, the way we're connected to each other and the way we are connected to the environment, then you should, again, rethink what we are and how we are connected. Thank you.
3 points for me. One is I wish that one day we can talk about a joint COP, right? Climate and biodiversity COP. I believe that will be cost efficient because it will allow us to maybe have in one place, but also in terms of carbon footprint, that will be very helpful. So let's think about that. And the second is I'm hoping that as part of the resolutions and outcome of this COP, there will be clear mention of the link between climate change and biodiversity, and hopefully that can be brought into COP15 in Montreal. And over there in Montreal too, I'm hoping that the leadership role of indigenous peoples, local community in conservation would be really valued. And last, I wanted to come to the friendship, the partnership, the collaboration. It is time for North-South, South-South to really think about collaborating around all these issues. And that will make us really more inclusive and talk about more about equity and really thinking about not only our own continent, but how all these issues that are global issues that touch everyone, how can we come together as partners, as friends, to really deal with the climate crisis, but also the biodiversity crisis. Thank you again for allowing me to be part of this very inspiring panel. This is my last panel of COP, and I'm very happy. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of you for attending today. This is, again, Solutions Day, and we know the solutions are right here in the communities, and we hope that the negotiators here in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Montreal listen to these solutions. I hope all of you leave knowing that there are solutions, that in spite of some of the dour news we hear in the media about things, that there are hopeful, effective partnerships happening all the time, and we're seeing it right here. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for this. Thank you all for participating in this. Thanks to National Geographic for helping put on this event, and for the Nature Zone for hosting us, Nature Positive Zone for hosting us today. Thanks all, and have a great rest of the COP and a safe travel home.
That's it for today's theme on nature for development and climate. Thanks for joining the Nature for Life Hub, and please be sure to check out all the different offerings in this year's hub, including our Action Center, and join us tomorrow for the theme of financing nature.